Bantam Audio Publishing presents Shadows by John Saul. Shadows. Timmy Evans woke up in shadows. Shadows so deep he saw nothing. Tentatively, the first tendrils of panic already beginning to curl around him, Timmy began exploring the blackness of his shadowed world, trying to reach out into the darkness. He could feel nothing. It was almost as if his fingers themselves were gone. He put his hands together. Instead of the expected warmth of one palm pressed firmly against the other, there was nothing, no feeling at all. The tendrils of panic grew stronger, twisting around Timmy Evans like the tentacles of a giant octopus. His mind recoiled from the panic, pulling back, trying to hide from the darkness. What had happened? Where was he? How had he gotten there? School. He'd been at school before he woke in the shadows. A nice school, a school he liked, with a big house set on a broad lawn shaded by the biggest trees Timmy had ever seen, redwood trees. He'd never seen trees that big before his parents had brought him to the school. Nor had he ever had friends before. Friends like himself, who could do things with their brains that other children couldn't. But now, something had happened to him. What? He'd awakened in the night and heard something. Heard what? Timmy couldn't remember. He concentrated, and a fleeting memory stirred. A rattling sound like the old elevator that went from the first floor all the way up to the fourth floor. Then, nothing, until he'd awakened in the shadows. Again he tried to reach out, but his body refused to respond. His entire body was paralyzed. Now the panic that had been entangling him in its grasp gripped him with an irresistible force, and he screamed out. Screamed out, silently. Out of the shadows, lights began to shine. Brilliant lights in a spectrum of colors he'd never beheld before. Sounds, too, burst forth out of the silence that had surrounded him, a cacophony of achromatic chords, layered over with the screeches and cries of the damned souls of hell. The sound built, along with the blazing lights, until Timmy Evans was certain that if it didn't stop, his eyes would burn away and his eardrums would burst. Then, as the sensory attack built to a crescendo, Timmy Evans knew what was happening to him. Just as he realized what was happening, the last moment came. The light struck once more, with an intensity that tore through his brain, and the howling cacophony shattered his weakening mind. In a blaze of light, accompanied by the roaring symphony of 1,000 freight trains, Timmy Evans died. Died without ever remembering exactly what had happened to him. Died in a manner so horrible, no one would ever be told about it. The first day of school was even worse than Josh MacCallum had thought it would be. Part of it was the weather. It was one of those perfect days when any normal 10-year-old boy would rather be outside, poking around in the desert that surrounded Eden, searching for horny toads and bluebellies, or just watching the vultures circling in the sky, than maybe going to hunt for whatever had died. But Josh MacCallum wasn't a normal 10-year-old, and it didn't seem as though anyone was ever going to let him forget it. Not his mother, who was always bragging about him to her friends, even though she could see him squirming in embarrassment every time she went on about how he'd been skipped. Skipped, like it was some kind of terrific thing, something he should be proud of. Except it wasn't neat. It wasn't neat at all. All it meant was that you were some kind of freak, and when you came into the room on the first day, the room where you didn't know anybody because all the kids you'd gone to school with last year were in another room in another building, they all stared at you and started whispering and rolling their eyes. It had started even before he got to school that morning, when he'd attempted to talk to one of the guys who was going to be in his new class. "What's Mrs. Schultz like?" was all he'd said that morning as he'd run into Ethan Roeder on his way out of the ugly little row of apartments they both lived in. Ethan had barely glanced at him. "What do you care? All the teachers love you, don't they?" While Josh's face had burned with the rebuff, Ethan yelled to a couple of his friends, then took off without even a backward glance. Josh had struggled to hold back his tears. He had felt a burning urge to pick up a rock and throw it at Ethan. But he had just thrust his hands into his pockets and started trudging through the dusty streets toward the cluster of sun-baked brown buildings that was Eden Consolidated School. Eden. Even the name of the town was a crock. He'd figured out a long time ago that the name of the town was just a publicity stunt, thought up by some developer to fool people into thinking there was something here besides cactus and dirt. The town looked as lonesome as Josh felt, and as he had approached the school that morning, he'd thought about just walking on by and straight out to the freeway 5 miles across the desert where he might be able to hitch a ride to somewhere else. Los Angeles, maybe, where his father had gone after he had left Josh and his mom. At least that was where his father had been living the last time Josh had heard from him. The urge to keep on walking hadn't lasted any longer than the urge to throw a rock at Ethan Roeder, though, and Josh had gone into the middle school building and found Mrs. Schultz's room. It was just like what had happened the last time he'd been skipped. He had stayed outside until the last possible second, and when he finally slipped through the door, hoping to sink unnoticed into a seat in the last row, Mrs. Schultz had spotted him and given him a too bright smile. "Well, here's our little genius now." Josh had cringed at the word, wishing he could disappear through a hole in the floor. He'd looked straight ahead as the rest of the kids, all of them 2 years older than himself, had turned to gaze at him. He hadn't had to look at them to know the expressions on their faces. They didn't want him there. They didn't want him getting perfect scores on all the tests while they could barely answer the questions. What was so wrong about being smart? It wasn't his fault he remembered everything he read and could do algebra in his head. When the noon bell finally rang, Josh busied himself with his book bag until the rest of the kids were gone, then slid out of his seat and started for the door. Before he could escape, the teacher's voice stopped him. "Josh?" He paused, but didn't turn around. He could hear Mrs. Schultz's heavy footstep coming down the aisle toward him. When he felt her hand on his shoulder, he once again wished the floor would open and the earth would swallow him up. "I just wanted to tell you how happy I am to have you in my class this year. I know it's not going to be easy for you." Josh spun around and stared up at Mrs. Schultz, his stormy eyes brimming with tears. "No, you don't. You don't know if it's going to be easy or hard, and you don't care either." Jerking away from the teacher, Josh stumbled into the mercifully empty hall, then ran toward the boys' room. 5 minutes later, his tears dried and his face washed, he emerged and uttered a silent sigh of relief when he found the hall empty. He went to his locker, put his book bag inside, and took from the locker his lunch bag and the copy of Les Miserables his mother had recently given him. Though he knew the cover wasn't real leather, he still admired it for a moment, with its ornate gilt border surrounding a fleur-de-lis pattern. Since he would be sitting by himself in the cafeteria, he might as well read a few chapters. In the cafeteria, he took a seat at an empty table in the far corner. No one spoke to him as he threaded his way between the tables, but he could feel them watching him. He sat down with his back to the room, determined to ignore the rest of the kids, and started on the peanut butter sandwich and the small container of cottage cheese that invariably made up his lunch. He read the book as he ate, and was soon lost in the tale of Jean Valjean, who was just then stealing a set of silver candelabra from the kindly priest who had taken him in. Josh turned the pages rapidly, taking in every word and sinking deeper and deeper into the story. Then, with no warning at all, the book was snatched out of his hands. Startled, he looked up to see Ethan Roeder smirking at him, the book held just out of his reach. "What you readin', smart boy?" Ethan's mocking voice grated on his ears. Josh shoved his chair back, rising to his feet. "It's just a book. Give it to me." Despite Josh's frantic efforts to snatch the book back, Ethan opened it. "Well, looky here. The little creep's reading some other language." "It's French, all right? Give it back." Josh reached for the book once more, but Ethan was too quick for him. The older boy grabbed Josh's arm, squeezing hard, his fingers digging into the younger boy's flesh. Josh pulled his arm free, then picked up his chair and swung it at Ethan. "Leave me alone, you asshole!" The bigger boy ducked, then grabbed one leg of the chair and twisted it out of Josh's hands. "All right, break it up." Arnold Hodgkins had been principal of Eden Consolidated School long enough to know how to put a quick end to a disruption in the cafeteria. Now he strode from the cafeteria door, wading through the crowd gathered around the two boys, each of his thick hands clamping hard on the shoulders of both combatants. "That'll be enough. Got it?" Josh winced as the principal's fingers tightened on his shoulder. "Well, what happened, Josh? he heard the principal demanding. Josh shook his head miserably. I was just sitting by myself, reading. Ethan grabbed my book and wouldn't give it back. Oh, geez, he heard Ethan groan. What would I want his stupid book for? I just asked him what he was reading, and he went apeshit like he always does. That'll be enough. The look in Hodgkin's eyes told Ethan not to press his luck any further. All right, Roeder. You clean up this mess. MacCallum, you come with me. Josh nodded. His head down, he followed the principal out of the cafeteria, already preparing himself for the lecture he was going to get about disrupting the cafeteria. The first day of school this year, he decided, was even worse than the first day last year. And it wasn't going to get any better. Chilly up, no tears. Brenda MacCallum acknowledged the shout from the kitchen with a quick nod of her head and turned her attention to the table of 4 impatient men she was waiting on. Not that she could blame them for their irritability, but was it her fault that Mary Lou had called in sick that morning, leaving just herself and Annette to deal with the lunch rush? Still, the slow service wasn't the customer's problem, and she held her temper carefully in check as one of the men changed his order for the 3rd time. But when Max's voice, etched with sarcasm this time, came again, his demand to know if she'd suddenly turned deaf snapped the thread of her nerves. She yelled back, I hear you, but I've only got 2 arms and 2 feet. More like 1 of each, given the service around here, one of the men muttered. Brenda checked the words that hovered on the tip of her tongue and turned away, heading for the kitchen. Only another 45 minutes until the noon rush was over. 45 minutes until she could sit down, drink a cup of coffee, and rest her feet. As Brenda passed the cash register, the phone beside it started ringing, but she ignored it, moving on to the pass-through to slip the order onto the wheel and pick up the 3 plates of chili that were still steaming under the warming lights. Annette, who had picked up the phone, held it out to Brenda. It's Arnold Hodgkins, and he says he has to talk to you. Now. Brenda's heart sank. No, she told herself as she set the chili down and started toward the phone. Not yet, not the first day, please. But her heart sank further as she heard the school principal's voice on the phone. Hello, Mrs. MacCallum. The note of tired resignation with which the words were freighted told her the whole story. Oh, Lord, what's Josh done this time? He was in a fight in the cafeteria. I'll get there as soon as I can, Mr. Hodgkins. She had hoped that the problems of last year were over, that by following the school's recommendation to skip Josh into the next class, he'd be challenged enough to stop relieving his boredom in the classroom with constant troublemaking and displays of temper. Well, so much for that hope. It was Ethan. He started it. All I was doing was reading Les Miserables, and he came up and grabbed the book away from me, Josh said. Brenda's gaze shifted to Arnold Hodgkins. What are we going to do? Brenda asked. It was the same thing last year. Maybe you shouldn't have skipped him again. It might have been better to have left him with his class. Hodgkins shook his head doggedly. That's not the problem. The problem, when you get right down to it, is that we just don't have any programs for kids like Josh. He needs special programs with specially trained teachers, and he needs to be with other kids like himself. His eyes fixed on a pamphlet that had arrived on his desk only yesterday, along with a computer-generated personalized letter suggesting that Josh MacCallum might be a candidate for the school the pamphlet described. Brenda was dazed by the principal's last words. What are you saying? How am I supposed to find the kind of school you're talking about? Before she could go on, Hodgkins handed her the pamphlet. It was from a place called the Barrington Academy, and on the heavy buff-colored paper was printed a sketch of a large mansion surrounded by a broad lawn studded with towering redwoods. Brenda regarded it quizzically, then looked up at Arnold Hodgkins. What's this? It doesn't look like any school I've ever heard of. It's not, Hodgkins replied. It's a private school designed for gifted children. It's up north at... Private school? Where am I going to get the money for private school? I'm a waitress. I get minimum wage plus tips. And let me tell you, in Eden, the tips aren't much. Brenda paused to fight back her tears, then summoning what dignity she could, went on. How much does it cost? She asked. Of course, any sum he named was going to be totally out of the question. "If Josh can get in, it probably won't cost a dime," Hodgkins replied. "The academy operates in conjunction with the university, which studies the children while they're in school there." Brenda's expression turned skeptical. "You mean they use the kids as guinea pigs?" "Not exactly. It seems to be run as much like a family as possible. Though the children are being observed, they're not aware of it." As Brenda's mouth opened to ask another question, Hodgkins held up his hand. "Look, before we get any further into this, let me call. Let's just see what the situation is. They might be full, or they might not even be prepared to look at Josh, but it's worth a try." Slowly, as she stood up, Brenda said, "All right, I guess I'd better talk to them." Hildy Kramer sat at her desk in what had originally been one of the smaller reception rooms of the mansion that housed Barrington Academy. A cup of coffee, stone cold now, sat near the telephone, and she raised it to her lips, making a face as the stale brew touched her lips. Replacing the cup, she looked out the window for a moment, enjoying as always the view of the broad lawn, dotted with redwoods and eucalyptus that fronted the house. Then, remembering her tight schedule, she returned to the task of reviewing the paperwork on Joshua MacCallum that had come flooding in by fax yesterday afternoon and this morning. All his school records were there from kindergarten on, along with the results of the various standardized tests to which he had been subjected over the years. Josh MacCallum was obviously a highly gifted student. He was precisely the sort of child that the academy had been designed for. She would look forward to meeting him and his mother for an initial interview. There was a knock at her door. She glanced at the clock embedded in the walnut trim of her desk blotter. Another prospective student, a 10-year-old named Amy Carlson, was due to arrive with her parents for a final interview. She went to the door, opened it, and greeted Frank Carlson. A moment later, all three Carlsons were lined up on the sofa, Amy between her parents. Amy was a thin child with thick, round glasses perched on a snub nose who looked not only frightened, but angry. Hildy offered the little girl an encouraging smile, but the child's face remained rigid. "Why do I get the idea you're not nearly as glad to see me as I am to see you?" Hildy asked as she sat down behind her desk. "Because I'm not glad to see you at all." Amy's face screwed up in a fearful expression. Amy had been scared ever since she had first awakened that morning. "I don't want to come here. I want to go home." She did her best to glare at Hildy, but failed as tears welled in her eyes. She clamped them shut, unwilling to let Mrs. Kramer see her cry. "Well, I don't blame you," Hildy agreed. "If anybody had tried to send me away to school when I was 10, I just would have flat out refused to go. I'd have thrown a tantrum so bad my parents never would have suggested such a thing again." The words startled Amy. Involuntarily, she opened her eyes again. "You would?" Amy's expression was guarded, as if she suspected a trap. "Of course I would," Hildy went on, rising to her feet. "And I wasn't nearly as smart as you are. If you changed your mind, how come you didn't figure out a way to make your parents let you stay home? If I could have done it, I can't believe you couldn't." "Well, I tried," Amy blurted out. "I even locked myself in the closet, but Mom had a key." Not smart. If you're going to lock yourself in a closet, always make sure you have all the keys with you." The beginnings of a smile played around the corners of Amy's mouth, and she ran her fingers through her shock of red curls. Having lowered Amy's defenses, Hildy thought now would be a good time to show the little girl where she would be staying. Taking Amy's hand in her own, Hildy led the little girl out of the office. Her parents followed as Hildy ushered their daughter up the stairs, then up a second flight to the third floor. Halfway down the hall, Hildy opened a door and stepped aside to let Amy enter first. But Amy, as if sensing that by going into the room she would be agreeing to accept it, paused at the threshold and peered suspiciously inside. Her eyes flooded once more with tears. "Do I really have to stay here, Mom? Why can't I go home?" She flung her arms around her mother's waist. Margaret Carlson patted her daughter gently, while her worried gaze met Hildy Kramer's encouraging smile. "But, honey, just yesterday you were excited about coming here, don't you remember?" Amy did remember. When they'd visited the week before, the big old house had seemed really neat, and Mrs. Kramer appeared to be nice. Now, however, the thought of being left all alone here made her tremble. "I changed my mind. I want to stay with you and Daddy and Kitty Cat."
Kitty cat? Well, you didn't tell me you had a cat.
He's all black with white feet, and he sleeps with me.
Well, for heaven's sakes, we have a cat here. His name's Tabby, and he was wandering around all day yesterday looking for a place to sleep, but nobody seemed to want him. Say, maybe he could sleep with you.
But, even as Amy started to protest, as if by some prearranged signal, a yellowish cat appeared at the door, looked around for a second, then went directly to Amy, rubbing up against her leg and mewing plaintively. Amy hesitated, then squatted down and put her hands on the cat's head.
Is what she said true? Don't you have any place to sleep?
As Amy gathered the cat into her arms and sat down on the bed to make friends with it, Hildy nodded to Frank Carlson. Amy's father, understanding the signal, went downstairs to bring his daughter's luggage up. It wasn't until Brenda MacCallum turned off Highway 101 and started up into the hills between San Jose and the coast that she finally relaxed and began to believe that the old Chevy was going to survive the 400-mile trip from Eden. They'd left that Saturday morning at 4 a.m., with Josh complaining that it was too early to get up, and Brenda insisting that if the car was going to get them to the academy at all, they'd better get out of the desert before the heat of the day set in. Half an hour after making the turnoff, they came to the outskirts of Barrington. It was a small town, but larger than Eden, situated on the coast and nestled comfortably between the beach and the hills rising behind it. It had none of the look of self-conscious newness that clung to all the burgeoning towns around San Jose. Following a series of discreet signs, Brenda finally came to the university. A few minutes later, the signs brought them to a wide, wrought-iron double gate that stood open at the foot of the long driveway. Awed by what she saw, Brenda brought the car to a halt. At the head of the redwood-lined driveway, nearly a quarter of a mile away, stood the largest house Brenda could ever remember having seen. It had 2 wings, each 3 stories high, that stretched away from the center of the house, which itself was surmounted by a 4th floor, cupola, that apparently held a private apartment. Brenda started up the long driveway toward the house. As they passed between the twin rows of redwoods, they glimpsed children here and there sprawled out on the lawn, reading or working over sketch pads. Brenda pulled up to the immense Mediterranean-style villa. 2 boys, no more than 12 years old, were hunched over a chessboard that was set up between them on the tiled loggia that ran the full length of the front of the mansion and curved around it at either side. The boys glanced first at her, then Josh.
You the new guy?
One of them asked. Before Josh could reply, the front door opened and a slightly overweight woman of about 45 appeared. She started down the steps, her hand outstretched.
Mrs. MacCallum, I'm Hildy Kramer. I was beginning to get a little worried about you.
We really weren't sure how long it would take. We're not too late, are we?
Oh, my, no. Any time would have been just fine.
Hildy turned to Josh, offering him her hand.
And you're Josh, right? Or is it Joshua?
Josh. He uncertainly took the woman's hand.
Good. I like that name. It's nice and strong-sounding. Have you met Jeff Aldrich and Brad Hinshaw?
Hildy indicated the 2 boys, who were once again hunched over the chessboard. Hearing their names, they glanced up, then scrambled to their feet. Hildy introduced them to Josh.
Do you know how to play chess, Josh?
He hesitated, then shook his head.
Then they'll teach you while I have a talk with your mother, okay?
Josh paled slightly, his eyes darting to the 2 boys. They looked like they were a couple of years older than he was. He was sure they'd grown and start rolling their eyes like the boys in Eden had last summer when his mother had made him go to the summer sports program at the school and the coach had put him on the softball team. He'd played 1 inning, then gone home, the taunts of the other boys still ringing in his ears after he'd been unable to catch a single ball in right field and had struck out in 3 pitches when he'd come up to bat. Now, to Josh's surprise, the boy named Jeff motioned him to come over to the board. As Josh hunkered down between the 2 of them, Brad said, "That's the king," and pointed to the largest of the men. "I'm playing white and Jeff's playing black, and all you have to do is capture the other guy's king." He pointed quickly to the various other pieces, naming each of them and explaining the game. Though he talked so quickly that Brenda was immediately confused, Josh seemed to be following every word he said.
"Hey, Jeff," said Hildy. "I've got $1 that says Josh beats you first time out. But you have to promise to show him all the moves and not get creative when you play. Deal?"
"Deal," Jeff agreed. After watching the boys play for a few seconds, Brenda let Hildy guide her into the house. 30 minutes later, after she had had a full tour of the house, save for the cupola on the 4th floor, which Hildy had explained was the school director's private residence, Brenda sank down into the depths of the leather-covered sofa in Hildy Kramer's office, grateful for a moment in which to collect her thoughts. Brenda felt overwhelmed. There was nothing about the place that was anything like what she had been expecting. From what she had seen so far, the academy didn't resemble a school at all. Instead, it appeared to be just what it looked like from the outside, a huge home where people lived. Hildy recounted the manner in which George Ingersoll had gone about building his school.
I assume you're familiar with the term nerd.
Brenda nodded. Some of the kids call Josh that all the time.
I bet they do. Anyway, this whole area is filled with people who were nerds when they were kids. Except they're not nerds anymore. Now they're computer millionaires and they have more money than they know what to do with. Dr. Ingersoll went to every one of them and explained what he wanted to do. It was very simple, really. He just told them he wanted to set up a school for kids who were like they'd once been, that was totally geared to meet the kids' needs. Not just academic needs, but social and psychological needs as well. Needless to say, the response was incredible. Within a year, the academy was totally funded. The money still pours in.
Brenda spotted an opportunity to voice the worry that had been growing within her from the moment she'd heard about the school. But, it has to be expensive. Hildy nodded.
Oh, it costs a fortune to run, but Dr. Ingersoll covered that too. Since brilliance isn't a function of wealth, he insisted that no financial demands be put on any of our kids' families. So we operate on a sliding scale. The higher a family's income, the higher our fees. But they never exceed what the family can comfortably afford.
Brenda swallowed nervously and hoped her voice didn't betray the extreme embarrassment she was feeling. I don't know if I can afford anything at all. Hildy stopped her with a gesture.
We already know that. You must understand that money isn't a problem here. The purpose of this school is to provide children like Josh with an environment in which they can flourish, no matter what their parents can afford to pay. We're not here to take your money, Brenda. We're here to help kids like Josh, who have brilliant minds and all the problems that usually go along with that brilliance.
Brenda took a deep breath. Are you saying you'll take him then? Brenda was uncomfortably aware that her hands had begun sweating.
I'm almost certain we will. This afternoon after lunch, Dr. Ingersoll will give Josh some tests and have a talk with him. From his records, I doubt very much that there'll be any reason for us to turn him down. But there's another question, of course.
Brenda's brow furrowed with uncertainty. Another question? Hildy smiled thinly.
The question of Josh himself. Does he want to come here?
I'm not sure. Hildy smiled.
In that case, let's just let him get a feel of the place and get to know some of the kids. If he's like most of them, he'll have slid right into things before he even stops to think about whether he wants to or not.
Brenda cocked her head, contemplating the older woman. Is that why you left him outside instead of bringing him in to show him around?
Of course. The sooner he starts making friends, the more he's going to want to be here.
Brenda smiled. You really love these kids, don't you?
Every one of them. There's nothing as satisfying as watching these children grow up.
They'll take him. Brenda silently prayed. They've just got to take him. He belongs here. Half an hour later, as Brenda MacCallum and Hildy Kramer stepped out onto the loggia, they heard Brad's voice.
Checkmate! He got you! On his very first game, he got you!
Josh had been reluctant to make the final move, but Jeff was still smiling despite his loss.
Pretty good. Maybe we ought to enter you in the tournament this year. And maybe you ought to pay me my $1, Hildy Kramer reminded him.
Jeff shrugged.
All my money's up in my room. How about if I pay you later on? How about if you get my $1 before I forget about it?
Ah, jeez,
Jeff groaned, but got to his feet and signaled to Josh to come with him.
Come on, you might as well see how terrible the rooms are here. Maybe you can talk your mom out of putting you in this jail.
He ducked out of the way as Hildy took a playful swipe at him, and he darted into the house with Josh following. As they entered the huge foyer, Josh stopped to ogle the mansion's interior. Jeff grinned at him. "Cool, huh?" Josh nodded, eyeing the brass cage of the antique elevator by the stairs. "Does that work?" Jeff's grin broadened. "Sure. You want to ride it?" Josh nodded again, already moving toward the ancient contraption. He pulled the door open, watching as the polished brass slats of the barrier folded in on themselves. Stepping inside, he waited for Jeff, then closed the door with a resounding clang. He pressed a worn black button etched with a faintly visible arrow pointed upward, and the machine came to life. From somewhere above, gears meshed, and the car jerked into motion, rattling satisfyingly as it rose slowly to the second floor. "Really cool," Josh breathed as he followed Jeff out onto the second-floor landing. "Wait till you see my room," Jeff replied. "It's the coolest one in the school." Josh was puzzled, remembering Jeff's words of only a few moments ago. "But you said it was like a jail." "I was just giving Hildy a hard time. Come on." He led Josh to a room at the end of the hall. Opening the door, he stepped aside to let Josh go in first. "Ta-da!" he sang, flinging out an arm as if he were a magician who had just amazed his audience. "The most excellent room in school, awarded to me because I am a truly awesome person." Josh gazed around the large room. It was at least 4 times the size of his at home and had windows on 2 sides. There was a desk covered with a scattering of books and papers and an unmade bed with a jumble of dirty clothes at its end. But what grabbed Josh's attention was an enormous aquarium that sat against the wall next to one of the windows. It wasn't like anything he'd ever seen before, and it was filled with fish he instantly recognized from pictures he'd seen in the Eden Library's collection of National Geographics. "Geez, if I had something like this." "If you want to see something neat," Jeff interrupted, "you should see what my brother's got." "Your brother? Where's he?" "Next door. Come on." He led Josh to the room adjoining his own. Without bothering to knock, he pushed the door open and walked in. In contrast to chaos in his own room, this room was neat and tidy. The bed made, all the clothes put away in the closet and dresser. The desktop was bare, save for a computer. A boy sat at the computer terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard, his eyes glued to the monitor. If he was aware he was no longer alone in the room, he gave no sign. Jeff nudged Josh, held his finger to his lips, then crept up behind the other boy. Abruptly, he grabbed his brother's chair and spun him around. "My brother, the computer nerd!" Josh's eyes widened. Sitting in the chair was a carbon copy of Jeff. Josh glanced from one face to the other, searching for differences. There seemed to be none. Each of the boys had the same black curly hair, the same dark brown eyes, the same square jaws. "This is Adam," Jeff announced. "He's my kid brother by 10 whole minutes." Adam's face flushed, and he tried to push Jeff away, but Jeff began pushing Adam's chair toward Josh. "This is Josh MacCallum. He wants to see your virtual reality setup." "Can't you knock?" Adam complained. "You're not supposed to come into people's rooms when their doors are closed, and I'm right in the middle of something." "You're always in the middle of something. Lighten up, have some fun. Get the helmet and glove and show Josh how it works." For an instant, Josh thought Adam was going to argue with Jeff. He watched as the twin brothers stared at each other. Then, almost as if Jeff held some sort of power over him, the defiance drained out of Adam's eyes. Though neither of the boys had spoken, Josh had the eerie feeling that they had nonetheless had some kind of argument and that Jeff had won. A moment later, Jeff was fitting a strange kind of helmet onto Josh's head, along with a heavy glove that went on his right hand. I can't see anything," Josh protested as the front of the helmet dropped over his eyes. "You're not supposed to," Jeff told him. "Just sit in the chair and wait a minute while Adam gets it hooked up." "We're not supposed to," Adam began, but Jeff cut him off. "Just do it, Adam, okay? It's not like this is some kind of big secret. Josh will probably have one himself by next week." Adam made no reply, and Josh let himself be guided into the chair and waited to see what was going to happen. The front of the helmet came to life. A picture appeared before Josh's eyes, an image of the room he was in so perfect in every detail that he would have sworn the helmet had somehow turned transparent. "Turn your head." The sound of Jeff's voice came through speakers within the helmet itself. Josh did, and the image of the room shifted.
Get up and move around, Jeff told him. Josh hesitated, but finally stood up and took a tentative step forward. Again, the image shifted, exactly matching the perspective he'd had without the helmet. It's all digitized, Jeff explained. If the cable was long enough, you could wander all over the house and everything would show up in the helmet. Wow, Josh breathed. Awesome. You ever want to fly? Jeff asked. Huh? Watch. The image changed, and Josh found himself in the cockpit of some kind of airplane peering out the window to the scenery below. But he could also see the controls of the plane. See the joystick here, Jeff asked. Use your right hand to control it. But it's not real. Just try it. Use your right hand and pretend you're reaching for the stick. As Josh mimed the action with his gloved right hand, he saw a hand on the screen of the helmet moving toward the joystick. As Josh touched the joystick, something in the glove stimulated his hand so that he imagined he could feel the object he appeared to be clutching. Now, fly, Jeff told him. Josh, entranced by what was happening, moved the joystick to the right, and the plane appeared to bank over, the horizon tipping, the view of the landscape below veering sharply. Instinctively, he straightened the plane out. Josh took the helmet off. It's neat. But how does it work? Jeff's grin broadened. You really want to know? Josh nodded. Jeff leaned forward to whisper in Josh's ear. Magic, he said. It works by magic. For just a moment, Josh almost believed him. 1 minute remaining, George Ingersoll said. Brenda MacCallum glanced up at the clock. 4:59 p.m. She'd been waiting for nearly 3 hours. Since 2 o'clock, Josh had been alone in a room adjoining Ingersoll's office, which was in a building that stood on the grounds between the academy and the university campus. He was working on the battery of tests that would determine his eligibility for the school. For the first hour, Brenda had endeavored to pretend that she wasn't worried that whatever the test contained, Josh would pass them with flying colors. Then she became fascinated as Ingersoll, a craggy-faced man of about 45 with iron-gray hair and horn-rimmed glasses, had started explaining the academy's structure and what it aimed to accomplish. Not only for its students, but for gifted children everywhere. It was clear that Ingersoll regarded his students almost as if they were his own children. The more she heard, the more Ingersoll impressed Brenda with his ideas and the simplicity with which he was able to explain them, and it was only reluctantly that she finally shifted her attention to Josh's image on the closed-circuit television screen mounted on the wall of the director's office. How's he doing? George Ingersoll made no answer, for he too was staring at the monitor, his gaze seeming to bore right into the image on the screen. A bell sounded in both Ingersoll's office and the adjoining room. Josh looked up at the clock and was surprised to see that the allotted 3 hours had passed. He scanned the sheets on which he had marked his answers and felt a vague queasiness in his stomach. At least a quarter of the questions weren't marked at all, and how many of the ones he'd answered had he answered wrong? But it wasn't possible. He'd never failed to complete a test before, not even the ones they'd said no one was supposed to finish. He'd always done them all, finishing with plenty of time left over. And now he'd failed. He wasn't going to get into the academy at all. A wave of frustration crashed in on him, and he picked up the pencils on the table in front of him and hurled them across the room. Then, snatching up the test booklet, he burst through the door to Dr. Ingersoll's office. There wasn't enough time, he yelled, his face red, his eyes screwed into tiny slits. Nobody could finish your stupid test. Flinging the book at Dr. Ingersoll, he stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. Her own face turning crimson with embarrassment, Brenda leapt to her feet and started after him. I'm sorry, she said over her shoulder. I don't know what got into him. I'll make him apologize. Before she could leave the room, George Ingersoll grasped her arm and led her back toward the chair. It's all right, Mrs. MacCallum. But he just experienced the hardest test he's ever taken. He didn't finish it, couldn't finish it, and he's feeling totally frustrated. But he's right about one thing, Ingersoll smiled. No one can finish that test in the allotted time. That's part of the point. I need to know how the kids react to being stymied, and Josh reacted very, very well. Brenda gaped. Well, you call that fit reacting well? Ingersoll chuckled. In terms of Josh, yes. It tells me he's not lazy. and that he likes to get things done. All he wanted to do was finish the test, Mrs. MacCallum, and I frustrated him, which was part of the test. And frankly, I'd rather see him get mad than just accept the limitations of even an intellect as good as his. So let's let him cool off and find out how he did, all right? Going to the next room, he picked up the sheets that were covered with Josh's answers to the hundreds of questions and frowned. Until now, none of the students had ever filled in so much as half the answer sheets. It looked as though Josh had come close to completing nearly 75% of it, unless, of course, Josh had simply been making blind guesses toward the end. Well, he'd soon know. Taking the sheets back to his office, Ingersoll began scanning them into his computer. In less than a minute, he'd have Josh's results. Hildy Kramer tapped softly at Amy Carlson's door. When there was no answer, she twisted the knob and let herself into the room. Amy was lying on her bed, her eyes red from crying. Next to her, rubbing against her legs and mewing to be petted, was Tabby, obviously worried that something was wrong with her new friend. Hildy sat down on Amy's desk chair. "Didn't you hear me knocking?" Amy, her face stormy, made no reply, and when Tabby tried to work his head under her hand, she jerked the cat petulantly away. "Oh, that's not nice. All he wants is to be petted." Amy's little chin jutted out. "I'm not feeling very nice. I wish Tabby would go away and leave me alone, and I wish you would, too." "Well, I'm not going to. At least not until you tell me why you aren't going to today's picnic at the beach. It's beautiful Saturday, and I know you like to go swimming."
I don't want to go swimming. I just want to call my mother and have her come and get me.
Hildy chose to ignore Amy's angry tone. "I thought we had an agreement. You talked to your mother twice on Thursday and again yesterday, and we agreed that you'd talk to her again tomorrow, but not today." Amy's chin began to tremble and her eyes glistened with tears.
"I don't care. I miss my room and Kitty Cat and everything else. I hate it here and I want to go home."
"But we all agreed that you'd try it for a week. That's only a few more days, and—"
"I want to go home now. Nobody here likes me and I don't have any friends."
"Well, that's just not true," Hildy argued patiently. Ever since Wednesday, Amy had spent as much time as she could alone in her room, and yesterday she hadn't even gone to her classes. If it went on much longer, Hildy would have no choice but to call the Carlsons and tell them that it wasn't working out. But she wasn't ready to give up, not yet. "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to stay right here with you. I can have a bed brought up here, and—" She would have gone on talking, but Amy leaped off the bed, sending Tabby sprawling to the floor, and stormed out of the room. By the time Hildy had gotten to the hall, Amy was pounding down the stairs. Smiling, the house mother followed. When she reached the loggia, she found Tina Craig, a 13-year-old student, staring after the departed Amy.
"Amy just went tearing outside," the girl told her. "She was crying like crazy, and when I tried to stop her, she just jerked away from me and kept going."
"Which way did she go?" Hildy asked.
"Over there,"
Tina said, pointing to a clump of redwoods planted in a circle near the middle of the front lawn, their massive roots completely hidden by thick shrubbery. Hildy nodded in satisfaction. "She'll be fine," she told Tina. Amy hadn't taken off for the front gate after all, but only for the hiding place the children had named the gazebo. Yes, little Amy would be just fine. Tina headed off to the picnic on the beach, and Hildy returned to her office, determined to finish the report she was working on. Yet even as she worked, she kept half an eye on the gazebo. It wouldn't do to lose Amy Carlson now. The little girl had far too good a mind to allow it to go to waste somewhere else. Amy crawled through the dense shrubbery, ignoring the twigs that scratched at her face and caught at her t-shirt. A few seconds later, she emerged from the bushes and paused to catch her breath. Sprawling out on her back, she peered at the branches that mingled 100 feet above her head, shading the clearing within the circle. Then, from off to the right, she heard a sound. Startled, she turned her head and saw a boy about her own age staring at her. She'd seen the boy from her window arriving with his mother that morning. But what was he doing here? If he was coming to the school, why wasn't he down at the beach? She thought she heard him sniffle, and saw him wiping his nose on the sleeve of his shirt. "That's gross," she said. "Don't you have a handkerchief?"
The boy shook his head. I don't need one. I'm okay. Amy rolled over and propped her chin on her hands. You don't look okay. You don't either, the boy replied. The two children stared at each other for a while until Amy looked away. Is your mom making you come here? She asked, sure she knew why the boy was hiding in the circle of trees. She's not making me, Josh replied with a show of bravado he didn't feel. Besides, it doesn't make any difference what she wants. I flunked the test. Amy cocked her head. Don't be stupid. Nobody flunks the test. It's not that kind. But I couldn't even finish it, Josh said, his voice catching in spite of himself. I didn't even come close. Amy, her own problem suddenly forgotten for a moment, moved closer to Josh. How much did you get done? Josh shrugged. Oh, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of it. 3/4? I didn't even get half of it done. Josh gave her an assessing look. Was she lying to him, just trying to make him feel better? Well, what are you doing here? He said. How come you're not at the beach with everybody else? Amy felt herself flush. I didn't want to go. How come? Don't you like the beach? Do you? Josh shrugged. I don't know. I've never been. I live out in the desert. Not anymore, Amy said darkly. If your mom's like my mom, you're going to have to live here now. Josh's brows knit into a frown. But everybody likes it here, don't they? I don't. I hate it. I don't have any friends and nobody likes me. I just want to go home. Josh was silent for a moment, and then he giggled. It's not funny, Amy exclaimed. Sure it is. I'm hiding out because I flunked the test and I'm not going to get in, and you're hiding out because you want to get out. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Amy thought about it for a minute, then nodded. I guess so. What's your name? Josh MacCallum. What's yours? Amy Carlson. So, what's the beach like? Amy shrugged. I haven't been to the one here yet, but in L.A. it's really neat. We always go to Huntington Beach, and it's real wide. And when the surf's high, it's scary. But my dad taught me to body surf this summer, and it's really fun. Josh was silent, wondering what it would be like to have a father who took you to the beach and taught you things. He guessed he'd never know. Did your friends go to the beach with you? In L.A.? Amy realized that Josh didn't know that she didn't have any friends back home either. But when she spoke, she found herself telling him the truth. I didn't have any friends there. They kept skipping me in school, and I was always the youngest one in my class. Josh nodded. Yeah, that's what happened to me, too. That's why my mom wants me to come here. He looked away, unable to bring himself to look at Amy as he said, I was just thinking that if I get in and you don't go home, maybe we could be friends? Amy, feeling suddenly flustered, didn't say anything at all for a long time, and Josh wished he'd kept his mouth shut. She was just going to laugh at him, like all the rest of the kids. Just as he was turning away from her to start crawling back through the bushes, he heard her say, That'd be nice. Maybe we could just talk to each other sometimes. A couple of minutes later, they emerged from the gazebo and brushed the twigs and needles off their clothes. Hildy, leaning back in her chair and watching them through her window, smiled. Amy Carlson, she was sure, had just gotten over her homesickness. And Josh MacCallum, she suspected, was never going to have much of a problem with it at all. George Ingersoll went over the results of Josh's tests once more, looking for some possibility that a mistake had been made. Yet, there was none. Though Josh hadn't been able to finish all the problems, the ones he had attempted, he'd solved. And in the last half hour, when he'd realized he was running out of time, Josh had changed his working method. The tape made by the camera that had been placed just above the table at which Josh had been working bore witness to the transformation. At 4:41, Josh had spent precisely 8 seconds staring at a complicated algebraic equation.
only 8 seconds. Then he had begun turning the pages, marking answers to questions that required little thought. He'd worked quickly, marking his answers until abruptly he'd stopped, flipped back to the page containing the equation. He marked the answer sheet, then found the next problem, one having to do with physics, a subject about which he should have known very little. Again, he'd simply looked at the question, his finger touching it briefly before going back to the subjective questions. What Josh had been doing, George Ingersoll realized, was solving the difficult mathematical problems in his head while at the same time working on other questions. In all his experience with gifted children, he'd never seen anything like Josh MacCallum. He leaned back in his chair and faced the boy's mother, who sat nervously on the edge of her chair. "Well, how did he do?"
"I have to tell you, Mrs. MacCallum, Josh is probably the brightest child I have ever come across."
"Are you going to take him?"
Ingersoll arched an eyebrow. "Oh, yes. We'll take him. We'll take him with pleasure."
The next morning, when he awoke to the sound of classical music, Josh felt a momentary disorientation. Blinking in the sunlight that flooded through his dormer, he had one of those awful seconds of panic when he didn't know where he was. And when he finally remembered, the panic only increased, for he also remembered that last night his mother had kissed him goodbye after getting him settled into his new room. After showering, Josh went down to the dining room where most of the other kids were already eating. He chose his breakfast from the table where the food was set out and automatically headed toward an empty table. Before he'd gone more than a few steps, Jeff waved to him, and Josh joined the twin brothers. A few minutes later, when Amy appeared in the dining room, Jeff waved her over too. For the rest of the week, the four of them sat together at every meal. The days passed quickly. Both Josh and Amy discovered that the academy was nothing like the schools they'd come from. While there was still a lot of teasing among the kids, for the first time in their lives, both of them felt that they were part of the group, not outside it. And both of them had begun to join in the good-natured banter, and even to share in the laughter when the jokes were at their own expense. Josh was finally beginning to think that maybe he wasn't the freak that all the kids in Eden had made him feel he was. On Friday, in Steve Connor's English class, they started reading Hamlet at the beginning of the hour, with Josh as Hamlet and Amy as Ophelia. At first it was kind of boring, but then Mr. Connors stopped the reading and regarded them with mock exasperation.
What's going on with you guys? This is a play. It was written as entertainment. Come on, gang, a little ham, okay?"
They started over again from the beginning, and suddenly the play, which had seemed incredibly dull when Josh had read through it the night before, came alive. As his classmates got caught up in the drama of the piece, Josh began to imagine himself in the vast, cold chambers of Elsinore Castle. But in the midst of one of his speeches, the door opened and Josh looked up to see Adam Aldrich coming in. Josh faltered, then stopped, for the one thing that Steve Connors was absolutely strict about was promptness.
"I only have an hour a day with you, and I don't intend to waste it," he'd explained to the class on Monday when Josh himself had been late because he hadn't been able to find the room. "So if you're not going to show up on time, don't bother to come at all. Clear?"
Josh, his eyes wide at the rebuke, had nodded mutely and slid into his seat. Now he waited to see what would happen to Adam. Steve Connors gazed steadily at Adam, who seemed totally unconcerned about his tardiness.
"Didn't you understand what I said Monday?"
Adam shrugged. "I've got a note from Dr. Ingersoll." He handed the note to the teacher, and Connors glanced at it before nodding Adam into his seat, making a mental note to talk to the director that afternoon.
"Okay, let's pick it up where we left off. Adam, you take over the part of Polonius. We're on page 27.
The reading began again, but when Polonius's next line came up, there was silence. Connors grimaced.
"Adam!"
"I lost my place," Adam replied. He read the line, but with absolutely no expression to his voice. Then he missed his next line.
"What's going on, Adam? Didn't you read the play last night?"
Adam slouched low in his chair. "I didn't have time." Connors eyed the boy. Every day, it seemed, Adam was showing less and less interest in the class.
"What were you doing that was more important than your homework?" Connors asked.
Adam's normally placid expression turned sullen. "I was just doing something else, that's all. It's none of your business." Connors frowned.
Come on, Adam. If it affects what's happening to you in my class, I think it is my business.
Then maybe I won't be in your class anymore.
As the rest of the students watched in astonished silence, Adam Aldrich picked up his book bag and stood up.
I hate this class. It can get stuffed for all I care.
He walked out. As a tense silence hung over the class, Josh gazed at the door through which his friend had disappeared.
All right, gang, he heard Mr. Connors saying. Let's go on with the reading. Brad, you pick up Polonius's lines, okay?
Steve Connors added a mental note to his list of things to attend to later on. Check with Ingersoll to find out what's going on with Adam.
What's going on with Adam?
Josh asked Jeff Aldrich that night. It was an hour after dinner, and he and Amy were studying in Jeff's room. Jeff, who had been concentrating on the computer monitor at his desk, turned to peer mysteriously at Josh.
Maybe,
he began, his voice dropping into that same mysterious tone he'd used when he was telling ghost stories at the picnic last week.
He's seen Mr. Barrington, the millionaire who built this place.
Josh groaned. Come on, man, that's such a lie. There's no such thing as ghosts.
Really? You mean you haven't heard it at all?
Josh looked skeptical.
Heard what? The elevator. Sometimes late at night you can hear it running, but if you go look, it's not moving, and there's no one in it.
Amy gazed raptly at Jeff.
Then, if it's not the elevator, what is it?
Jeff's eyes bored into her.
It's old Eustace Barrington creeping around the house at night, looking for the son he kept hidden in the basement his whole life because the son had nothing in his brain except mathematical equations. Millions of mathematical equations.
Josh swallowed the lump that had risen in his throat. Jeff went on.
The boy disappeared when he was 5 years old, and nobody ever saw him again or found his body. No one knows what happened to him. But they say he died in this house, and the old man's still here looking for the people who killed him. And maybe that's why Adam's acting so weird. Maybe he's seen Mr. Barrington. And maybe Timmy Evans saw him too.
Come on, Josh protested, trying to shake off the chill that had gripped him. Don't tell Amy stories like that. You'll scare her.
Her? Jeff echoed. What about you? You look pretty scared. And maybe the story's true.
Who's Timmy Evans? Amy demanded.
He's the kid who stayed in Josh's room last year. Boy, I wouldn't want to be in that room.
Josh looked puzzled. How come he's not here this year? Jeff Aldrich grinned.
He died.
Died? Josh felt a chill run down his spine. What happened?
They said he killed himself.
Wide-eyed, Amy said,
Do you really think Adam saw Mr. Barrington?
He was acting really strange today.
Jeff shrugged. Don't ask me. Nobody ever knows what goes on with Adam. Sometimes he just gets real quiet.
Oh, he wasn't quiet today, Josh told him. He talked back to Mr. Connors.
Oh, come on. Adam? He wouldn't talk back to anyone.
Well, he did this morning. Josh told Jeff what had happened in the English class. What's Adam doing with Dr. Ingersoll? He asked when he was finished. When Jeff hesitated, Amy glared at him. What is it? Some kind of big secret?
It's just a special seminar. It's about artificial intelligence, Jeff replied. Dr. Ingersoll's trying to figure out how people think, and if he does, it's going to change everything.
There isn't any such thing as artificial intelligence, Amy announced with the absolute certainty of her 10 years. Nobody can figure out how people think.
Yeah? What makes you so sure? Jeff teased.
I read about it in Scientific American. It was all about what they're trying to do at Stanford and MIT and all those places. So far, they can't even make a computer think of putting on a raincoat if it's raining outside. So why did Adam stay late at Dr. Ingersoll's seminar this morning? Jeff's air of mystery returned.
It's a secret. Nobody in the class tells anyone what we're doing. I shouldn't have told you as much as I did.
Amy rolled over.
That is so stupid. I don't believe you.
I bet if I asked Adam, he'd tell me. Jeff's lips twisted into a knowing sneer.
Bet he wouldn't. The three kids trooped over to the room next door where Adam was sitting at his computer wearing his virtual reality helmet and glove. Jeff, signaling Josh and Amy not to say anything, moved to the computer and glanced at the screen. Then he picked up the microphone that sat on his brother's desk, pressed the button on its side, and whispered into it. "I'm here, Adam. I'm here, and I'm watching you." Adam froze, then jerked off the helmet, snarling at his brother. "What the hell do you want?" "Hey, chill out, huh? We just wanted to talk to you for a minute." Adam noticed Josh and Amy standing uncertainly near the door. "I'm busy. Couldn't you see my door was closed?" "We just wanted to ask you what your class with Dr. Ingersoll is about," Josh told him, already edging toward the door. "What's wrong with you anyway? How come you're acting so weird?" A guarded look passed quickly across Adam's face. I'm okay. I'm just busy with something, all right?" "But what?" Amy asked. "What's that helmet thing?" Adam licked his lips nervously, his eyes flicking toward Jeff. "It's something Dr. Ingersoll gave me." "Why don't you tell her? You showed it to me the other day." Josh turned to Amy. "It's called a virtual reality helmet. When you put it on, it shows you things on a screen, but it looks just like you're really seeing them." "Really? Can I try it?" she asked. "No," Adam shouted. Amy scowled at him. "Well, who wants to see your stupid helmet? I'm leaving." Turning on her heel, she stamped out of the room while Josh eyed Adam curiously. In the week he'd known him, Adam had never acted like this. He'd always been quiet, letting Jeff talk for him most of the time, but he'd always been nice. Josh observed, "You didn't have to be mean to her, and I didn't invite her in here either, did I? Or you. So why don't you just go with your girlfriend and leave me alone?" Josh felt himself turning red. "All right, I will." Josh wheeled and stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind him. When Josh had gone, Jeff gazed steadily at Adam. "You're an idiot," he said. Then he was gone, and Adam was alone in his room. Adam wondered, after tonight, would he ever see his brother again? Probably not. But what did it matter? What really did anything matter? After all, he couldn't ever remember having been really happy, not on a single day of his life. Picking up his virtual reality helmet, he placed it on his head once more. A second later, he was lost in the world conjured up by the computer, a world that was nothing more or less than a projection of what it would be like to be inside the computer itself, to be an electron whizzing through the minute circuitry, exploring the endlessly complex world contained on the surface of the microchip. "That's what I should have been," Adam told himself. "I never should have been born at all. I should have been something else, something that doesn't feel any pain." Tonight, he reflected with a cold shiver of anticipation, I'll run away from the pain and never come back. The train moved fast down the track. In the 25 years the engineer had been making the run, there had never been an event worth reporting to a supervisor. So tonight, as the train hit 60 along the straightaway north of Barrington, and the engineer prepared to begin his slow deceleration to the 15-mile speed limit through the town itself, he wasn't really paying too much attention to the track ahead. By the time he saw the object on the track, as he came around a curve, it was far too late to stop the train anyway. Still, he slammed on the brakes and shouted to the fireman, "Looks like some idiot dropped a bag of garbage on the track." The train began to slow, the brakes screaming as the engineer pulled hard on the lever. Then, as the headlight caught the object in the full brilliance of its beam, he realized that the object wasn't a bag of garbage at all. It was a person, crouched down between the tracks, his back to the train. The train bore down on the object, losing speed with every second. The engineer prayed for a miracle. It didn't come. The engine struck the person on the tracks, and as the body flew into the air, the engineer realized it was a boy, a young boy, dressed only in worn jeans and a red shirt. Oddly, he found himself wondering if the boy had worn the red shirt on purpose, so the blood wouldn't show as much when the train struck him. Not that it mattered, the engineer reflected as the train finally ground to a stop 200 yards further on. Red shirt or not, the force of the blow when the train hit him would have turned the boy into little more than an unrecognizable mass of torn flesh and crushed bones. Instinctively, the engineer looked at his watch. It was almost 4:30 in the morning. A miserable time to die. Though the room was dark, so dark he couldn't see anything at all, Jeff Aldrich knew he wasn't alone. He could sense the other person in the room with him. Adam. It was Adam who was there, looking at him. Adam? There was something different about his brother, something he didn't understand. You thought I wouldn't do it, didn't you? Jeff felt a terrible wave of remorse wash over him. No. What did you... But it was too late. Adam was gone. In his room on the 3rd floor, Josh MacCallum awakened, hearing a sound. It hadn't taken him more than a moment to realize what it was. The elevator, its gears grinding, its cage rattling in its frame. Instantly, Jeff Aldrich's tale of the ghost of Eustace Barrington had popped back into his mind, and his first instinct had been to hide his head under the covers and try to blot the sound out of his ears. But then he realized what was happening. It was Jeff himself, riding the elevator in the darkened house, and no doubt laughing silently at the scare he was giving Josh. So Josh got up, pulled on his robe, and went into the hall, creeping down the dark corridor until he came to the elevator shaft. He heard the sound of the machinery, but the elevator wasn't moving. In fact, when he peered down the shaft, he could just make out the top of the cage barely illuminated by the chandelier in the foyer. The sound suddenly stopped. Josh held his breath, afraid even to move. Nothing happened. He waited for several seemingly endless minutes, half expecting the ghost of Eustace Barrington to appear on the stairs, floating toward him in the darkness. But when nothing more occurred, he went back to bed and lay awake, listening for what seemed an eternity, listening in the darkness. Now, there was a new noise. Josh jerked upright, bolting into a sitting position. What had it been? Then, coming in through his open window, he heard an anguished voice calling out, "Adam, come back!" Jeff. It was Jeff's voice. Josh jumped out of bed, ran out of his room, and raced down the hall to the stairs. Taking them 3 at a time, he arrived at the 2nd floor to see sleepy faces peering out at him from the doors along the hall. "What's wrong?" someone asked. "What's going on?" Josh didn't reply. He continued racing down the hall to Jeff's room. He pushed the door open and flipped on the light. Sitting up in bed, his face livid, his whole body trembling, was Jeff. The room, except for the curtains fluttering gently at the open window, was still and quiet. "Jeff? What's wrong? You okay?" Jeff Aldrich managed to nod his head. I had a nightmare. It was about Adam. He was gone. It was like he was dead or something." "Jeez," Josh breathed. Jeff shuddered. "It was so real." "What's going on?" Brad Hinshaw asked, coming into the room. Then he saw Jeff. "Geez, man, you look like you saw a ghost or something." He did, Josh said. "He dreamed that Adam was dead." "Where is Adam?" asked Brad. The 3 boys stared at one another. Then Jeff got slowly out of bed and made his way toward the door, Josh and Brad backing away to let him pass. Jeff walked to the room next to his own, hesitated a moment, then went inside. The bed was empty. Before Jeff could say anything, Hildy Kramer appeared at the door. She seemed almost puzzled when she saw him, but then she said, "Jeff, could you come downstairs with me, please? There's something I have to talk to you about." At a little after 7 o'clock that morning, Steve Connors arrived at the academy and knew at once that something was wrong. 2 police cars were pulled up in the driveway. Steve parked next to one of the black and whites and mounted the stairs to the broad loggia. As he let himself in through the front door, the first person he saw was Hildy Kramer talking to one of the policemen. Near the foot of the stairs, a knot of children whispered among themselves, their eyes wide as they watched the policeman talking to their housemother. "What's going on?" Steve asked as he joined Hildy. "It's Adam Aldrich. I'm afraid he killed himself last night." Oh, no. Suddenly, Steve remembered the things he hadn't done yesterday. He hadn't mentioned either to Hildy or to George Ingersoll his concerns about the boy. He'd intended to, but then something had come up. He couldn't even remember what it had been, and the whole thing had slipped his mind. His horror at the thought must have showed on his face, for Hildy was staring at him. The policeman's eyes were fixed on him, too. "You, know something about the boy?" Steve nodded unhappily. He was in my English class. I knew he was upset about something, and I was going to talk to you about it, but it just went out of my mind, and now you feel as though you could have prevented it." Hildy looked at him, then turned to the police officer. "If you're finished with me now, I think I'd better have a talk with Mr. Connors." The officer nodded, closing his notebook. "I think I've got all there is to get. If there's anything else, I'll call you." When he was gone, Hildy took Steve Connors into her office. "Steve, I'm not going to pretend that your forgetting to speak to me about Adam wouldn't have made any difference. It probably would have, at least in the short run. But there's something else you've got to understand, or you'll never be able to deal with this school. This isn't the first time we've lost a student this way, and it won't be the last. In fact, it's one of the reasons we exist. Almost all of our students have problems of one sort or another, and several of them have tried to kill themselves in the past. Adam was among them. But the last time he tried it, no one thought it was truly serious. Most of the time when children try to kill themselves, they aren't serious, so I doubt that I would have hospitalized Adam given all the circumstances. I would have talked to Dr. E, of course, but there's no guarantee that this wouldn't have happened anyway. And I have to tell you that there's no guarantee that it won't happen to others of our students. Sad as it is, there is no way, short of isolating every one of them, that we can stop it entirely." She smiled wanly. "I doubt you'd be any more in favor of locking these kids up than anyone else here is." Despite Hildy's words, Steve Connors knew that he would still feel guilty for what had happened, perhaps for the rest of his life. He'd known the boy was in trouble, but had done nothing about it. It had slipped his mind. And now there was nothing he could do about it. Nothing he could do to bring Adam back to life. George Ingersoll had delivered Adam's eulogy. The last prayers had been spoken over the small casket that rested in front of the altar, and the recessional music had begun. After a last lingering look at the closed coffin that contained her son's body, Jeanette Aldrich allowed her husband to guide her back up the aisle toward the door, then took her place at his side to accept the condolences of the crowd of mourners. When the last people in the chapel had drifted away, the casket was borne up the aisle and carried to the waiting hearse, as the Aldriches watched. The pallbearers paused when they came to Jeff and his family. His mother laid her hand on the mahogany box, then quietly uttered a single word. "Goodbye." The family watched as the casket was placed in the hearse and the hearse pulled away. By the end of the day, Adam Aldrich's remains would be cremated and his ashes scattered somewhere over the sea. Late that night, Hildy Kramer went into George Ingersoll's private office, closing the door behind her. Ingersoll glanced up from his work and put it aside. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. "All right," he asked. "How bad is it?" Hildy smiled. "Not bad at all. I informed all of the parents, but the Lowensteins are the only ones who are pulling their child out of school. I can't talk them out of it. But Monica Lowenstein's the only one. All the rest are staying, including Jeff Aldrich." "Not bad. We can live with it. But it means my special seminar is now short 2 students. I have 2 candidates in mind, but I'd like to hear your recommendations first." Hildy didn't hesitate at all. "Josh MacCallum and Amy Carlson. They're both nearly perfect, 2 of our brightest students, and both of them have the intellectual and psychological profiles we're looking for." Ingersoll smiled. Very good, Hildy. Those are exactly the two candidates I had in mind. Rearrange their schedules for them to start tomorrow.
Josh MacCallum and Amy Carlson sat nervously on the bench outside Hildy Kramer's office. The house was quiet, for the rest of the kids had already headed for their first classes of the day. But during breakfast, Hildy had come into the dining room and instructed the two of them to come to her office. Finally, the door to Hildy's office opened, and Hildy herself stepped out to usher them inside. She smiled at them.
Well, look at the two of you. If I had known you were going to worry yourselves to death, I wouldn't have said a thing at breakfast. I'd have just stopped you on your way to class. Now come on in.
Warily, the two children followed Hildy into her office. As Josh and Amy perched anxiously on the couch, Hildy settled herself into her desk chair and said,
There are 2 vacant places in Dr. Ingersoll's artificial intelligence seminar. He and I both think you two are the ideal candidates for them.
Josh felt a thrill of anticipation. He'd always loved computers. Hildy went on.
Dr. Ingersoll's class is all about figuring out just how our brains come up with new ideas, so that we can design a computer to do it too.
But what exactly would we be doing? Amy asked.
Hildy shrugged. Dr. Ingersoll will have to explain that to you, but I can promise you'll like the seminar. Everyone who's been in it loves it.
Amy fidgeted on the couch. I don't know. Do I have to take it? What if I don't want to?
Well, I'm sure if you don't want to, Dr. Ingersoll will understand. Of course, you probably won't get to move down to the 2nd floor, but it's entirely up to you.
The 2nd floor? Amy asked, her interest suddenly engaged. The rooms on the 2nd floor were much larger than the ones on the 3rd. Why would we get to move downstairs?
Hildy smiled, as if it should have been obvious. It has to do with the seminar. All the students in Dr. Ingersoll's class are issued special computers, and the rooms on the 3rd floor are just too small. And since Adam's room and Monica's are empty,
she left the bait hanging. As she'd expected, both Amy and Josh snatched at it. Could we move downstairs today? This morning? Amy asked eagerly.
Well, you can move right now if you want to. Does that mean you both want to join the seminar?
The two children agreed eagerly, and Hildy opened a file folder that was already lying on her desk.
In that case, here are your new schedules.
Josh broke into a smile. Since we're taking another class, does that mean we can stop doing P.E.?
Hildy made a face of exaggerated disapproval. No, it doesn't mean you can stop doing P.E., but it does mean, she added as Josh's face fell, that we'll be making some changes in that, too. So as soon as you leave here, I want you both to go to the gym behind the college field house and see Mr. Iverson. I'll give you a note telling him why you're there, and he'll give you some tests and then help you set up a gym schedule that won't interfere with any of your classes. Okay?
Both children nodded silently, and Hildy handed them the note for Joe Iverson, who headed the university's physical education program. They left Hildy Kramer's office and headed towards the gym. Amy gave Josh a questioning look. How come they have to change our P.E.? Josh grinned. Who cares? We get new rooms and new computers, don't we? Amy nodded half-heartedly. The new room was great. She was already looking forward to that. But she didn't really care about the new computer, and changing her P.E. program seemed stupid. She started to say something else, but then changed her mind. After all, Josh didn't know any more about the seminar than she did, and the other kids in it hadn't ever said a word. That, too, seemed weird to her. How come they all acted like it was a big deal? It was just another class, wasn't it? Or was it? Joe Iverson grinned at the two children who stood nervously in front of his desk and slipped a note from Hildy Kramer under the metal clamp of his clipboard.
So, Dr. E's got 2 more hot prospects for his class, huh?
Josh and Amy exchanged a nervous glance, but nodded.
Well, then, let's get started, okay?
Once the two children changed clothes, they emerged from their respective locker rooms into the empty gym, where they found Joe Iverson waiting. They were weighed and measured, and their pulses and blood pressures were checked. Then the exercises began. After each round of exercises, Iverson once more recorded their pulse rates and blood pressures.
Okay, just one more thing.
He pointed toward a thick rope knotted every 18 inches that was suspended from the ceiling.
Which one of you do you think is going to be able to climb that the fastest?
Amy gazed up at the ceiling, at least 30 feet high. Did he really expect her to climb the rope all the way up there? Just the thought of it gave her a queasy feeling in her stomach. What if I fall?
How are you going to fall if you don't let go of the rope? Iverson countered.
But what if I do?
That's what the mats are for. If you think you're going to fall, don't go any higher. Just come back down, okay?
Amy looked at Josh.
It's okay. Just don't look down, he encouraged her.
Amy gripped the rope. Tentatively, she tugged at it, half hoping that it would break and come tumbling down from the ceiling. It didn't. At last, taking a deep breath, she started climbing, pulling herself up and wrapping her legs around the rope, moving her hands from knot to knot in quick motions, as if she might fall if she released her grip for more than a split second.
I'm doing it!
Forgetting Josh's warning, Amy peered down at him. A wave of dizziness swept over her. Her eyes widened in fear.
Don't look down! Look up!
Josh called. Struggling against her terror, Amy forced herself to look up, but now the ceiling too seemed far out of reach. When she tried to lower herself, her sudden panic wouldn't let her release the rope.
I can't do it! I can't get back down!
Instantly, Joe Iverson shinnied up the rope until he was right beneath her. It's okay, I'm right under you. Just put your feet on my shoulders, hang on to the rope, and stand on me, okay? Can you do that, Amy? As Josh watched from below, Amy transferred her weight to the coach's body. Iverson spoke again. That's right, Amy, I'm going to start down now. You just steady yourself with the rope and don't look down, okay?
Uh-huh.
A moment later, they were back on the floor, and Joe Iverson reached up, grasped Amy in his strong arms, and swung her down to the mat.
There. Safe. See? We made it.
Amy, her face pale, stood trembling as the panic slowly let her go. Josh watched her anxiously.
You okay?
Amy nodded.
I couldn't do it. When I looked down, I just got all dizzy.
It's okay, Joe Iverson assured her. It's just a little acrophobia. Why don't you two go shower? We're done.
Retreating to his office, Iverson switched on his computer terminal, called up the permanent records of Josh MacCallum and Amy Carlson, and began entering the data he'd collected. Though it meant little to him, he supposed that George Ingersoll had some use for it all. An hour later, in his office, George Ingersoll called up the same records. Tapping quickly at the keyboard, he began studying the data the coach had entered. What intrigued him most was the notation on Amy Carlson's record that she seemed to suffer from acute acrophobia. As he thought about it, an idea began to take shape in his mind. Perhaps there was a way to fit Amy's phobia into his seminar. He leaned back in his chair, the idea developing rapidly. The more he thought about it, the more he liked it. Whether or not Amy Carlson would like it remained to be seen.
What's wrong?
Josh asked Amy Carlson. It was a Monday morning, and the two of them were on their way to the artificial intelligence seminar.
Oh, nothing, I guess. I guess I just don't like the seminar very much, that's all. I think experiments on animals are mean. Oh, what are we supposed to do? If we don't do experiments, we can't learn anything. Besides, they don't feel anything. How do you know? What if they hurt?
Amy challenged.
But they don't, Josh protested. Dr. Ingersoll says... I don't care what Dr. Ingersoll says.
Amy's sour look turned angry.
Everybody in the seminar acts as if he's some kind of genius or something.
Now, as they mounted the steps to the building that housed the artificial intelligence lab, Josh gazed quizzically at Amy.
So, what are you going to do? You can't just quit.
Why not? They walked down the hall to the lab where the rest of the class was already clustered around a cage on the lab table. George Ingersoll peered up, then glanced meaningfully toward the clock on the wall.
Congratulations. You made it with a full 3 seconds to spare. But since you did make it, why don't you come over here so we can get started?
Amy and Josh joined the group, which was staring curiously at the animal in the cage. It was a cat, and the fur had been shaved off its head, which was bristling with tiny electrodes. The wires from the electrodes were bundled together and ran out through the bars of the cage to the computer.
The cat has already been conditioned, Ingersoll explained. A slight electrical charge can be transmitted through the floor of its cage. When the cat feels the charge, it can stop it by hitting either of the 2 buttons on the smaller compartments, which also release a small quantity of food into the main cage.
Amy, thinking of Tabby, shuddered slightly as she gazed at the grotesque-looking cat. It was prevented from pawing the wires on its head by a large cone-shaped plastic collar around its neck. "It doesn't look very happy," Amy said softly.
Ingersoll shrugged. "I don't suppose it is. On the other hand, it is not suffering at all, nor is the electrical charge enough to hurt it. It merely startles it into a conditioned response."
"But where's the food?" Jeff Aldrich asked, his eyes on the empty spaces where the rewards for a proper response should have been.
Ingersoll smiled approvingly.
"That is the whole point of today's experiment. What we are going to do is offer the cat 2 negative experiences. Since it is being monitored by the computer, we should be able to find out a lot about the physical processes its brain goes through as it tries to choose between 2 unpleasant alternatives. Shall we begin?"
Without waiting for a reply, he threw a switch activating the electrical charge. The cat's body tensed, and it immediately reached out with a paw and took a swipe at the left-hand button. Instantly, a small speaker within the cage blared out the sound of a snarling dog. Startled, the cat leaped back and was once more subjected to the tingling of electricity. It reached out again, trying the other button. The area around the cage instantly began to reek of skunk, causing the children to hold their noses, and the cat, only an inch from the nozzle spraying the redolent gas, to jerk reflexively back once again. Amy, outraged by what she saw, started toward the door.
"I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back either."
Startled by her words, Josh turned away from the cage. "Come on, Amy. It's not like we're hurting it."
"You are too. You're torturing it, and I'm going to tell."
A groan rose from the rest of the boys in the class. Amy turned scarlet, furious not only at what was being done to the hapless animal in the cage, but at the reaction of her classmates as well.
"I hate all of you."
She pointed an accusing finger at George Ingersoll.
"You're just as mean as they are."
Bursting into sobs, she fled from the room. Josh started after her, but Ingersoll stopped him.
"Let her go," the director of the academy said. "It's all right. Her reaction was perfectly legitimate. What we're doing isn't very pleasant for the cat, although it's not suffering any long-term damage. But let's take a look at what's happening to its brain."
Josh was torn between his urge to go after Amy and his equally strong desire to watch the rest of the experiment. In the end, his curiosity won out. For the rest of the hour, the boys worked, tapping instructions into the computer, comparing the activities of each area of the cat's brain to all the others. Amy Carlson's reaction to the experiment was all but forgotten, except by George Ingersoll. For him, the experiment had gone off perfectly. Amy Carlson, for whose sole benefit the entire performance had been staged, had reacted exactly as he had hoped she would. She was unhappy and she was angry. The pressure inside her was building. Amy, having hidden in her room for the rest of the morning, was sitting alone during lunch when she felt a hand on her shoulder.
"Amy, what's happened? Why are you sitting all by yourself?"
Amy stiffened.
"I just want to."
"Well, I know something must be wrong. Dr. Ingersoll wants to see you in his office before afternoon classes begin. And you didn't go to any of your classes after the seminar, did you?"
Amy licked her lower lip nervously and shook her head.
I didn't stay in his class either. They were doing things to a kitty and I left."
"Oh, dear. So that's why Dr. Ingersoll wants to see you, is it?"
"I guess."
Amy felt a flash of hope.
"Is he going to send me home?"
She tried to keep her voice from sounding too eager.
"It's not that easy to get expelled from the academy. I suspect he just wants to explain what they were doing and help you understand that the cat wasn't really being hurt."
"But it was. He was torturing it."
Doing her best not to exaggerate, she told Hildy about the experiment and what had happened to the cat. When she was done, Hildy's expression was every bit as angry as her own.
"If that's what happened, I think it's just as terrible as you do. I'll tell you what, I'll go with you to talk to Dr. Ingersoll, and if he's planning any more experiments like that, you and I will call the SPCA. Now come on.
Amy left her untouched lunch where it was. Maybe, after all, things were going to be all right. When they reached Dr. Ingersoll's office, he didn't seem to be mad at her at all. In fact, he seemed to be worried about her.
"Everything we do seems like it's being mean to the animals," Amy said. "And I can't even think about what we're supposed to be doing. I just worry about the animals."
"But, Amy," George Ingersoll explained one more time, "we're really not hurting them. The cat is going to be just fine. In a month, the fur on his head will be all grown out again, and he'll be just like he's always been." Amy's face set stubbornly.
"It's just not right to hurt poor little animals, and Hildy says I'm right."
Ingersoll turned to his administrator. "Is that true?" Hildy hesitated, then nodded. I'm afraid it is, George. I had no idea you were wiring up cats in that seminar." The two exchanged a long, probing look. "If it's going to continue, I'm afraid I'll have to resign."
"And we'll tell the SPCA on you, too," Amy chimed in.
Ingersoll took a deep breath and let it out. "Well, the two of you aren't really leaving me much choice, are you? I don't want to lose either one of you, and I suppose I can find other ways of teaching the class, so we won't do any more animal experimentation. Agreed?" Amy hesitated.
"Then what will we do?"
Ingersoll smiled at her. "How does this sound? Instead of trying to figure out how animals think, we'll try to figure out how human beings think."
"How?"
Amy asked suspiciously. Now Ingersoll chuckled out loud. "I'll tell you what. Remember last week when I asked you if you'd be willing to participate in an experiment?"
"But you didn't tell me anything about it," Amy protested.
"And I'm still not going to. If I did, it wouldn't be valid anymore. But I'll promise you this. I won't ask you to do anything you don't want to do, and you can stop the experiment anytime you want. And we'll have Hildy there just to make sure no one tries to talk you into anything, okay?" Amy's mind worked rapidly, searching for a trap. But if Hildy were there, how could there be a trap? Finally she nodded.
"All right, but I won't do anything I don't want to do."
"And I won't ask you to," Ingersoll repeated. Amy looked up at the clock on the wall. Only 3 more minutes until the last class of the day ended.
"But he said you don't have to do anything you don't want to," Josh had insisted when she'd talked to him an hour ago during the break between history and math. "What are you so scared of?"
Amy had said nothing at all, for the image in her mind was still the one of the cat in the cage, wired to the computer, being inflicted with electrical shocks, frightening sounds, and the stinking odor of the skunk. The bell rang. As the rest of the students hurried toward the door, intent on getting out into the afternoon sunshine, Amy lingered where she was, packing up her book bag. Finally, she left the building and started toward the gym on the other side of the university campus. She paused in front of the door to the women's locker room, screwing her face into her habitual tight squint of concentration. What if she changed her mind right now? Was it possible the experiment had already started? She glanced around. There were a few of the university students lying under the trees and walking along the sidewalks, but no one seemed to be paying any attention to her. She decided the experiment hadn't begun yet and walked on into the locker room. It was empty except for Hildy Kramer. "I was starting to wonder if you were going to show up at all," Hildy said, smiling. "Dr. Ingersoll wants you to put on a bathing suit and go out by the pool."
"The pool? Is that where the experiment is?"
"It's all right, Amy. We have plenty of bathing suits. I'll bring you one." Amy went to her locker and started undressing, and a minute or two later, Hildy reappeared carrying one of the shapeless maroon tank suits of which the gym was stocked. Amy eyed the suit with distaste.
"Yuck! I hate those things."
"Doesn't everyone? But I tried to find you a small one that doesn't look too worn out." Amy took the suit from Hildy and pulled it on. Poking her arms through the straps and wriggling, she pulled a piece of material over her body and then followed Hildy to the door of the pool. Suddenly, Amy's nerves got the best of her. She gazed pleadingly up at Hildy. "Can't you please tell me what the experiment is?"
Now, why don't you just stop worrying about it?
The sound of Hildy's warm laugh made Amy feel a little bit better.
You know I'm not going to tell you anything about it except that it's not going to hurt you at all. And if you don't want to take part in it, you don't have to.
Amy stepped through the door and stopped, startled by what she saw. At the far end of the pool, a curtain had been hung so the diving boards were completely hidden. 10 feet away from her, near the pool, was a chair. Next to the chair was a table on which sat a computer and what looked like some kind of headset. There were video cameras in various places around the pool, all of them trained on the empty chair. Dr. Ingersoll was sitting in a second chair facing the computer screen. Seated around him were the other members of the seminar. Did they all know what was going to happen? Was she the only one who wasn't in on it? She felt betrayed. Her eyes shifted away from the group of children gathered around the computer to the small grandstand that faced the pool from the other side. Sitting on the benches were at least 50 of the university students, and they were watching her too. Amy felt herself burning with embarrassment. Were all these people really here just to watch her? Behind her, she heard Hildy's voice.
Are you all right, Amy? Do you want to go ahead?
What Amy wanted to do was fall through the concrete and have the earth swallow her up. What would happen if she turned around and ran back into the locker room? They would laugh at her. All of them. They would know she was a coward, and even though they might not laugh out loud, inside they would be laughing at her. Even her friends would laugh at her, and she would feel just like she had back in public school. No. She wouldn't let it happen. Somehow she would get through it. She took a deep breath, then slowly let it out. I'm okay. Even she could hear the trembling in her voice. I just didn't... Who are all those people? Hildy smiled reassuringly at her.
They're from one of the psychology classes. Dr. Ingersoll invited them to watch the experiment.
But he didn't tell me.
Hildy knelt down. It's all right, Amy. Nothing's going to happen to you.
What am I supposed to do?
Just go over and sit in the chair. Come on, I'll go with you.
Holding Amy's hand, the house mother led her over to the chair, and Amy perched nervously on its edge. Dr. Ingersoll explained what was going to happen.
We're going to attach electrodes to you, Amy, so that we can record changes in your heartbeat and your breathing and your brain wave patterns. The cameras will be recording your facial expressions and your movements. And remember, you can leave any time you want to, just like I promised.
And have everyone laugh at me, Amy thought. She sat still on the chair as Dr. Ingersoll began attaching the electrodes to her body. Soon, she was even more festooned with wires than the cat had been this morning. At last, Dr. Ingersoll placed a helmet over her head, and she felt a mass of tiny points press against her scalp.
Does that hurt?
Dr. Ingersoll asked her. It's all right, Amy managed to say. Then her eyes met Ingersoll's, and he could see the fear in them. Something's going to happen, isn't it? Something awful.
Nothing awful at all,
Ingersoll reassured her. He checked the computer. On its display, Amy's respiratory rhythm, heartbeat, and brainwave patterns were clearly visible, reflecting a body under a certain amount of mental stress, but nothing out of the normal ranges.
All right, he said. We are about to begin. All I am going to do is ask you to make a decision.
At the far end of the pool, the curtain was suddenly pulled away. Next to the high diving board, a scaffolding had been erected. From the scaffolding hung the knotted rope, the same one she had tried to climb in the gym last week. Tried to climb and failed.
I want you to pick one of them, Amy. Which would you rather do? Climb the rope or jump off the high diving board?
Amy stared at Dr. Ingersoll. Was he kidding? Did she really have to do one of those things? But he'd said she didn't. He'd said she didn't have to do anything at all. Her heart sank. Already she could hear the laughter that would erupt from her friends when they figured out she was terrified of both the rope and the diving board. The cat. He was doing to her what he'd done to the cat this morning. A double negative. Make a choice between two things she hated, or let everyone know how terrified she was. Let them know and put up with them teasing her. Scaredy cat, Amy is a scaredy cat. She tore her eyes away from the rope and the diving board and looked at the faces of her classmates who were gathered around the computer, some of them watching the screen, some of them watching her.
Jeff Aldrich was grinning, already figuring out how scared she was. Trapped. Even after all his promises, Dr. Ingersoll had trapped her. Which? The rope? What if she fell? If she fell off the rope, she'd break a leg at least. But she might not fall off the ladder, not with bars to hang on to and steps for her feet. And when she got to the top, all she had to do was walk out to the end and jump off. Just the thought of standing on the narrow board 3 meters above the pool made her stomach feel hollow. But it was only 10 feet. Surely being terrified for a few seconds was better than having everyone laugh at her because she was chickened. I made up my mind. I'm going to jump off the diving board. Dr. Ingersoll removed the helmet from her head while 2 graduate students detached the electrodes from her body. But the cameras which had been recording her every facial expression, every movement of her body, were still running, and everyone was still watching. She approached the ladder that led to the diving board and was halfway up when she looked down and froze. Do it, she told herself. Just climb up, walk out on the board, and jump. As she contemplated the concrete beneath her, her terror of heights welled up in her, and she knew she couldn't do it. Tears streaming down her face, she scrambled back down and fled toward the locker room, covering her face with her hands, imagining that she could hear the laughter following her. Then she was inside the locker room, scurrying across the empty shower room. Stripping off the bathing suit, she hurled it into a corner and pulled on her clothes as fast as she could. Sobs of humiliation racking her body, Amy Carlson fled from the gym. By the time Hildy Kramer came looking for Amy, the locker room was empty. But Hildy was almost certain she knew where Amy had gone. Before anyone else saw Amy Carlson again, Hildy Kramer intended to find her. Josh watched Amy run away from the swimming pool and disappear into the women's shower room, wishing he could run after her. How could Dr. Ingersoll have done it to her? Didn't he know how frightened she was of heights? It was mean. Even meaner than what had been done to the cat this morning. In fact, when Amy had left the classroom that morning, Josh hadn't really understood what she was so mad about. After all, the cat hadn't been in any pain, not really. Dr. Ingersoll had told him so, hadn't he? Josh moved toward the door so he could catch up with Amy outside the gym, but Dr. Ingersoll, as if he understood what Josh was going to do, stopped him. Josh, let Hildy take care of Amy. She'll be all right. She just needs a few minutes to calm down. But she's crying. Yes, she is. It was a perfectly predictable response to the experiment. I'd be surprised if she wasn't. In fact, if you'll take a look at this, you can see exactly when the crying response began. Josh hesitated. Only when Hildy Kramer started toward the locker room did he make up his mind. Amy liked Hildy, and the house mother would know what to say to her better than he would. With his mind still half on Amy, he slipped in next to Jeff Aldrich and gazed raptly at the screen while Dr. Ingersoll explained what the graphs meant. But what about Amy? Josh asked when Ingersoll was finally finished. What about how she feels? Ingersoll's eyes fixed on Josh, and he saw the emptiness in them. I'm sure she's just fine. After all, we didn't hurt her, did we? As the rest of the class started out of the pool area, still buzzing about the results of the experiment, Josh stayed where he was, peering at the display on the computer monitor. It didn't show anything about what had happened to Amy herself, Josh thought. Hadn't anyone else seen the look on her face? Hadn't they seen how scared she was? Hadn't anyone else cared? Suddenly, wanting to be away from the pool, Josh hurried across the concrete decking. As he burst out of the gym door into the afternoon sunlight, he looked around, half expecting Amy to be waiting for him. Amy was nowhere to be seen. He should have been asleep an hour ago, but Josh was still wide awake, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. He kept thinking of Amy. Amy hadn't returned to the academy. Suddenly it occurred to Josh that Amy might never have left at all. What if she was hiding in the house somewhere? Slipping out of bed, Josh pulled his bathrobe on and slid his feet into his slippers. He went to the door, opened it a crack, and peered out into the corridor. It was empty and silent. He left his room, closing the door quietly behind him. He stole silently down the hall to the stairway and hesitated. Where? Maybe the cellar. His heart began to pound as he crept down the broad flight of stairs to the main floor. He scuttled across the foyer into the great dining room, barely illuminated by the spill of the weak light from the hall chandelier. Between the dining room and the kitchen, he knew, were the stairs leading down to the basement beneath the house. He came to the basement door, reached out with a trembling hand, and tried the knob. As it turned, part of him wished it had been locked. He pushed the door open, cringing as its hinges creaked. He stood still in the gloom of the butler's pantry, staring down into the blackness of the cellar below. He reached once more into the blackness, sweeping his hand upward so that his fingers would catch any switch that might be there. A naked light bulb flashed on at the bottom of the stairs. He crept down the stairs until at last he came to the concrete floor. Shading his eyes, he peered into the surrounding darkness. Amy. With each step and every unlocked room he came to, his hopes of finding Amy Carlson faded a little further. Still, he kept going, kept creeping through the shadowy maze. It was well past midnight when Hildy Kramer left her suite of rooms on the ground floor of the academy, glided silently up the stairs, pausing on both the second and the third floor landings to be certain that none of the children was prowling around the house. Then she went on up to the fourth floor and the small anteroom in front of the door to George Ingersoll's apartment. Knowing it was empty, she used her own key to let herself in, then relocked the door behind her. She switched a lamp on, confident that the light would cause no concern to anyone, since Ingersoll was notorious for the late hours he kept. Crossing to one of the bookcases, Hildy pulled out a thick volume by B.F. Skinner and groped for the tiny button that was hidden in a small depression in the wood. As she pressed the button, a section of the bookcase swung open, revealing an elevator whose shaft was hidden in the wall behind the ornate brass elevator which had proved endlessly fascinating to the children of the academy. Hildy pressed another button that would summon the second elevator and waited impatiently for the doors to slide open. Stepping into the car, she pressed the lower of the two buttons on its wall, and then waited once more as the elevator slowly descended to a level deep beneath the foundation on which the mansion had been built. To the subterranean rooms in which Eustace Barrington's idiot savant child had been banished at the age of 5. Banished to be cared for or to be held prisoner. Not that it made any difference now, a century after it had happened. All that was important now was that no one outside the innermost circle knew the rooms existed at all, nor would they until the time was right. Josh was just coming to what he thought might have been a coal bin when he heard the sound. It was faint, but he was certain he recognized it. The elevator. Someone was in the elevator. He went rigid. Had someone found out he wasn't in his room and had come looking for him? Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but then he realized that just because someone was looking for him didn't mean they would find him. The noise grew louder, and he listened, finally moving toward it, certain that it would stop in a moment as the car came to the main floor. Before him was a blank concrete wall, perhaps 8 feet across. Moving to its end, he found a second wall. The sound of the elevator seemed to come from behind the concrete. He pressed his ear to the wall, listening. The sound was louder. He went on, coming to another corner, and then the fourth. The shaft. He'd found the bottom of the elevator shaft. He pressed his ear to the wall again, just as the grinding of the machinery ceased. The car had come to a halt. A second later, he was sure he heard the door open. It sounded close. What if whoever it was saw light coming from under the basement door? The thought galvanized him, and he rushed back through the basement, switching off the lights as he went. Darting up the steep flight, he flipped the switch next to the door and stood motionless, straining to hear any movement on the other side of the pantry door. At last, terror gripping his soul, Josh groped in the blackness, found the doorknob, and twisted it. Through the crack in the door, he watched and listened. Nothing. Taking a deep breath, he darted from the shelter of the door, dashed across the foyer, and raced up the stairs. Before he'd even released his breath, he was back in his room, the door safely shut behind him. As he slowly released the air from his lungs, he went to the window and peered out into the faint moonlight. Outside, everything looked peaceful, but something told him it was not. Somewhere, he was certain, something was happening, either inside the house or outside of it. He would stay awake tonight and watch. Watch and listen. When the doors of the elevator opened, Hildy stepped out into a brightly lit hallway completely lined with glistening white tile. 3 paces down the corridor, she came to a door and paused to peer in through the small window that broke its otherwise blank facade. Inside, George Ingersoll was hard at work, wearing a surgical mask and gown, his hair covered by a pale green cloth cap. Quickly, Hildy moved on to the next room, where she washed her hands and arms, then donned the same kind of scrub suit that Ingersoll was wearing. When she was ready, she backed through the swinging door that separated the anteroom from the operating theater. George Ingersoll looked up, his sharp eyes glinting with annoyance. "I told you to be here by 11. I'm here now. Is everything ready?" "Of course it is ready. But I am still not sure it's the right time. I'd hoped to wait at least another week, maybe 2. You don't have another week or 2. Not with Amy Carlson. She was going to leave. You could have talked her out of it." "If I could have, I would have," Hildy replied, remembering the conversation she had had with Amy when she'd found her hidden within the circle of trees that made up the gazebo on the school's front lawn. She'd tried her best to reason with Amy, to calm her down, but it had done no good. Amy had insisted on going home, so Hildy had given in. "All right, Amy, let's go to my office and call your parents." Amy, apparently mollified, had allowed herself to be led to Hildy's office. "Why don't I get you a glass of water?" Hildy had offered. "By the time you drink it, you'll feel better and be calm enough to talk to your mother. All right?" Amy, still sniffling, had nodded. Hildy had given her a box of Kleenex with which to blow her nose, then disappeared for a moment. She returned with a glass of water, which Amy had promptly gulped down. It had taken no more than 30 seconds for the drug to take effect and drowsiness to overcome the little girl. Hildy had carried her quickly to the ornate brass elevator which brought them up to Ingersoll's apartment. Then she had carried her down in the second elevator to the laboratory beneath the academy's basement. Amy had been there ever since. Now, still unconscious, she lay on the operating table. Hildy dispassionately observed the girl's sleeping face and the tangle of red hair that framed her freckled cheeks. Then she shifted her attention to the equipment that was arranged around the table, equipment that would keep Amy alive through the next few hours. A respirator was waiting, and a blood pump. Nearby was a dialysis machine, along with an array of special equipment that George Ingersoll himself had invented. "Shall we begin?" Hildy asked. Nodding, George Ingersoll picked up a scalpel. A moment later, he'd made a slit that began behind Amy's left ear and went around the back of her head, ending at her right ear. Working quickly, he began peeling her scalp away from her skull. He didn't worry too much about how carefully he treated her face. Indeed, when they finally found her, if they ever did, George Ingersoll doubted whether anything would remain of Amy's face at all. Or any of the rest of her, for that matter. Certainly there wouldn't be enough left for anyone to figure out what he had done to her. George Ingersoll, with Hildy still at his side, finished the operation at 4 o'clock in the morning. "It's done," stepping back from the operating table, peeling the mask from his face and wiping the perspiration from his brow with the sleeve of his scrub gown. His eyes shifted to Hildy, who was already dressing Amy Carlson's lifeless body in the clothes the little girl had worn yesterday afternoon. "What are you going to do with her?" Hildy's expression hardened. All night long she'd taken orders from Ingersoll. But now, as with Adam Aldrich a week ago, it was her turn. "Don't ask. All you need to know is that it won't look anything like what happened to Adam. Nor will there be many questions, since everyone here already knows how depressed Amy was. And with the few minor adjustments that I'll make to her personality profile, well, when they find her, she'll be listed as a suicide." George Ingersoll helped Hildy carry Amy's plastic-enshrouded corpse out to her car. After depositing the body in the car's trunk, Ingersoll glanced anxiously at the faintly silvering sky. "If anyone sees you—" "They won't," Hildy assured him. "And if they do, it's quite logical that I've been out looking for Amy all night, isn't it?
Believe me, I won't do anything that will get the car searched."
Before Ingersoll could make another objection, Hildy firmly closed the trunk, then got into the car. A moment later she was gone, and Ingersoll quickly returned to the house. In his room, Josh MacCallum stirred in his chair, twisted uncomfortably, then sank back into the restless sleep that had overcome him despite his intention to stay awake all night long. He neither heard nor saw any of what had taken place as dawn began to break. Using a series of winding back roads, Hildy headed north. Driving carefully within the speed limits, she finally turned down a road that eventually intersected the coast highway, where a viewpoint had been constructed at the end of a huge finger of rock that jutted into the sea. When she was sure there were no cars coming from either direction, Hildy drove across the highway and along the narrow U-shaped road. At the very end of the point, there was a small parking lot totally hidden from the highway. She'd chosen the spot carefully, for the cliffs of the promontory plunged straight down to a rocky shoreline that was pounded by the surf 24 hours a day. By the time Amy was found, if she was found at all, her body would be battered into an unrecognizable pulp. It took no more than a few seconds to take Amy's body from the trunk and drop it over the edge. Hildy watched as the sea swallowed it up, then carefully folded up the sheet of plastic and returned it to the trunk of the car. As she added the final touch, Amy's red sweater with her name in the collar folded on the ground near the edge, Hildy heard the sound of a car approaching on the coast highway. When she heard it slow down, she realized what she had to do. Taking Amy's sweater, she began running toward the approaching car, waving her arms and shouting for help. As the car came around the curve, the headlights caught Hildy in their glare. Steve Connors, planning to go jogging early this particular morning, slammed on his brakes. What the hell? His car lurching to a stop just a foot in front of Hildy. He recognized her instantly and rolled down his window. "Hildy, what the—"
"It's Amy,"
she wailed, holding the sweater up.
"Thank God you're here. I've been up all night looking for her. I was about to give up when I thought of this place, so I came out and—"
Steve scrambled out of his car and took the sweater from Hildy. "Where was it? Where did you find it?"
"It was just lying on the ground, all folded up.
Folded up? You mean it wasn't just dropped?" Hildy shook her head.
"I was going to call the police."
"Show me. Show me exactly where it was."
"Over there, right by the wall."
His hands still clutching Hildy's arm, Steve strode to the low chain and stone wall that was built along the edge of the precipice.
"Here. It was right here."
Steve let go of her arm, then leaned over the wall to peer down at the rocky beach far below. He barely even noticed Hildy's hand touching his back, and for the slightest instant thought she meant only to steady him. Then, when it was already too late, he felt the push. His arms churned in the air as he instinctively tried to find something to grasp. Then he was falling. He tumbled through the air, uttering only a slight grunt as his body struck the cliff, bounced away, then plunged down into the boiling ocean below. 2 minutes later, Steve Connor's car had followed his body into the sea. A crowd had gathered on the beach, the usual curious throng that seems to form out of nowhere whenever a tragedy occurs. When Hildy Kramer had arrived, responding to a call from the police department, there had been barely enough room for her to edge off the road. Of the people on the beach, 6 of them were police officers and medics. The rest, a milling throng of sightseers who were talking among themselves, passing on every bit of information they'd picked up from other conversations they'd overheard. By the time Hildy had made it down the stairs to the beach and worked her way through to the knot of policemen and medics clustered around Amy Carlson's body, she had already heard 3 or 4 versions of what had happened. Hildy's expression tightened as she gazed down on what was left of Amy. But even as her gorge rose at the mutilation that had been done to the little girl, she still felt a sense of relief. It had worked, just as she had known it would. What the pounding of the sea might have failed to accomplish, something else had. Now she summoned up the proper tears of grief and sympathy for Amy Carlson.
"Dear Lord, what happened to her?"
One of the medics glanced up. "Sharks," he said. What was left of Amy's body was almost totally unrecognizable. The back of her skull was completely gone, and the jagged edges of the empty cavity where her brain had been were broken and irregular. Exactly, Hildy told herself, as George Ingersoll had left them, obliterating the work he'd done with a saw, with a small hammer and a pair of pliers. Eventually, the police got around to questioning Hildy about the girl.
One of the officers, recognizing her from the investigation of Adam Aldrich's death, told her that one of his men had just found a red sweater. "Up on the promontory, you know, where the viewpoint is?" Hildy put on a puzzled expression. "A sweater?" The officer spoke again. "It had her name in it." "At the viewpoint? Why would it be up there?" "There's a car in the water, Mrs. Kramer. We haven't gotten to it yet, but we were able to spot the license number. It belongs to one of your teachers, Steve Connors." "Dear Lord, you don't suppose—" "Oh, we're not supposing anything yet, Mrs. Kramer, but we'll be wanting to know everything you have about his background." Hildy shook her head. "Well, he just started this term. He seemed to be so fond of the children." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Maybe a little too fond, if you know what I mean." Hildy nodded. "I'd better go call Amy's parents." At a little after noon, Hildy Kramer once more took the elevator down to the laboratory hidden beneath the mansion's basement. She let herself into the room that was now the lab housing the heart of George Ingersoll's artificial intelligence project. In the room next door, completely separated from the lab by a glass wall, was the ominous-looking form of a Croydon computer. The twin black arcs that contained its vast range of microprocessors stood alone, forming a broken circle that was nearly 6 feet high. It was the only piece of equipment in the small room, crouched in lonely splendor in the center of its perfectly air-conditioned, dust-free environment. The most powerful computer in the world, the Croydon was as sensitive as it was fast. Other than the computer's designer, Alex Croydon, George Ingersoll, and Hildy Kramer, no one knew the computer was there. The computer's only connection to the outside world were a series of thick cables under the floor and a hermetically sealed door that Alex Croydon alone had the codes to open. Where his supercomputer was concerned, Alex Croydon didn't even trust George Ingersoll. The room in which Hildy now stood housed the keyboard that controlled the Croydon and an array of smaller computers, all of which were concerned with maintaining the contents of 2 glass tanks that stood in a special case at the end of the room. Each of the tanks contained a living human brain, floating in an environment of saline solution. From the stems of the brains, plastic tubing connected the main arteries and veins to machines that continually recirculated a blood supply, oxygenating it and cleaning it, eliminating wastes and adding nutrients. Bundles of tiny wires, each of them attached to a separate nerve, also emerged from the brainstem, a flexible spinal column that connected the brains directly to the Croydon computer. Probes were inserted into the brains as well, and their leads too ran through holes in the tanks to join the other cables that snaked beneath the floor. Now, finally, it was all happening. All the plans that had been laid 10 years ago were coming to fruition. For as Hildy scanned the monitors above the twin tanks, she could see by the graphic displays that the biological conditions of the 2 organs were precisely as they should be. As she moved forward, George Ingersoll glanced up from the keyboard. "Everything still stable? No signs of deterioration?" she asked. "He's doing even better than I could have hoped for. Look." Ingersoll tapped at the keyboard, and a moment later an image of a brain came up on the monitor that sat on his desk. "That is the way Adam's brain looked 24 hours ago. But look what is happening." He pressed some more keys, and a second image appeared on the monitor superimposed over the first. "Right there." Ingersoll tapped on the screen with the tip of a ballpoint pen. "See it?" Hildy's eyes widened slightly as she saw what Ingersoll was talking about. The brain in the left-hand tank, Adam Aldrich's brain, was larger than it had been yesterday. I didn't think that was possible," Hildy told him. "Nor did I," Ingersoll agreed. Hildy's eyes were suddenly caught by activity on the monitor above the tank on the right. As she watched, lines that had been quiescent only a moment ago began to waver, then form peaks and valleys. "What is it?" she asked. "What's happening?" "It's Amy," George Ingersoll replied. "She's waking up." Blackness. As the last of the narcotic was washed out of her brain, Amy Carlson's mind rose slowly into consciousness, but it was a consciousness such as she had never experienced before. She found herself in an unfathomable silence and darkness that made her scream out in terror. But nothing happened.
She felt nothing in her throat, heard no sound in her ears. Yet in her mind the scream echoed, surrounding her, fading away, then rising again. Or was she screaming again? She didn't know, for everything she knew, everything that gave meaning to her existence, had vanished. She tried to breathe, tried to fill her lungs with air again. Nothing happened. She felt no fresh air rush into her lungs, felt no relief from the terror that gripped her. Panic closed in on her. She couldn't breathe. She was going to die. Paralyzed. She was paralyzed. But how had it happened? Her mind reeled as she tried to follow a logical line of thought through the panic that was pouring at her from every direction, rolling in on her from the darkness, pressing her down. Dying. That's what was happening to her. She was alone and she was dying, and nobody knew about it and nobody could help her. She tried to open her eyes, sure now that whatever was happening to her could only be a nightmare, that when she opened her eyes and let in the light, the horrible darkness around her would lift, and she would once again be a part of the world. She blinked. Nothing. It felt as if her eyes no longer existed. Her panic threatened to overwhelm her now, but just before she succumbed to it, just a split second before it would have shattered her terrified mind, she staved it off once more, certain that if she gave in to the panic, she would never emerge from it again. Slowly, imperceptibly, she drove the fear back. There was a reason for what was happening to her, an explanation for the terrible feeling of being mired alone in boundless darkness. She wanted to cry out for her mother, to scream in the night for her mother to help her, but she knew it would do no good. Her mother wouldn't hear her, for she couldn't even hear herself. And her mother was home in Los Angeles, while she was at the academy. But she had been going home. She remembered. She had wanted to leave, and Hildy said she could. A glass of water. Hildy had handed her a glass of water, and she'd drunk it down. And then everything went blank until she awakened in this horrible blackness. Drugged. Hildy must have put something in the water. What? She began to think about it. A drug, some kind of medicine. What kind? Narcotics. Sleeping pills. Thorazine, Darvon, Halcyon, Percodan. The words popped at her out of the darkness. Words she hadn't even known she knew. They were drugs, painkillers and sleeping pills and medicines to tranquilize you. As they flicked through her mind, she realized that she knew exactly what each of them was for, and what each would do to someone depending on how much was taken. The sensation was strange. It was almost as if she were reading some kind of book that existed only in her mind. The simple process of thinking seemed to make the panic recede a little, and Amy began focusing her mind on the problem of what had happened to her. The darkness was still there surrounding her, but she found she could force it back by imagining things, seeing things in her mind's eye that she could no longer see with the eyes she had been born with. She pictured a beach, a broad expanse of sand with brilliant sunlight pouring down from a perfectly clear blue sky, and gentle surf lapping at the shore. She put herself into the picture and imagined her feet buried in the sand, feeling its warmth between her toes. Birds. There should be seabirds in the image, but what kind? Instantly, unbidden, images of birds came into her head. Birds she'd never seen before, even in books. And yet, they were there, all of them. And as she gazed first at one, then at another, information about each of them appeared in her mind. Their size, their coloring, the parts of the world they were native to, even images of their nests, complete with eggs. But where was it coming from? It was almost as if... Her mind froze as a concept suddenly took form, a concept she rejected in the instant it occurred to her. And yet, she remembered a computer she'd seen not more than a month ago, a CD-ROM display in which an entire encyclopedia had been put onto one compact disc. All of it digitized and cross-referenced, so all you had to do was bring up an index on the screen, then begin clicking a mouse, moving deeper and deeper into the volumes of information, looking at pictures, even listening to snatches of music or speeches given by people who had died long before Amy had even been born. And now what was happening in her mind was almost exactly like what had happened when she'd manipulated the mouse through the encyclopedia on the disc. Except her brain was the mouse. Her mind began racing, images forming, making connections to other images, dissolving and reforming. Was she dead? Was that what had happened? No, not dead. If she was dead, she wouldn't be alone. She knew what heaven was like. She'd pictured it in her mind hundreds of times. What if she was wrong? What if she wasn't in heaven at all? Hell? Could the blackness surrounding her be hell? No, she wasn't bad, and she wouldn't have gone to hell. And if she was dead, she would feel it, she would know it, and she didn't feel dead at all. She felt alive, alive, but trapped in some kind of world she didn't understand. A world where she had no senses. She couldn't see anything or hear anything or feel anything, even smell or taste anything. And yet she was alive, as if her mind was existing outside of her outside her body. She began remembering things she'd heard, snatches of conversation. Maybe Adam's not dead. Maybe he's just gone away, but they found his body. His body crushed by a train. What would a train do if it hit a human body? Instantly, figures began whirling through her head. The weight of a locomotive and its speed, the strength of bone. She factored in a coefficient of flexibility and tensile strength. The numbers churned with the speed of a computer, and suddenly she had the answer. Adam's skull would have been smashed and his brain crushed, killing him instantly. If his brain was still in his skull at all. But if his brain had been taken out of his body, as her body seemed to have been detached from her brain, images of human anatomy flicked through her mind. Data piling upon data, she began to understand how the systems of her body worked, and how little of it was needed to keep her brain alive. Finally, in a moment of terrible clarity, she understood. The blackness was real, for she no longer had eyes with which to see. The silence was real, for she no longer had ears with which to hear, no fingers or toes or tongue or throat, no lungs with which to breathe, no heart to pump blood through the body she no longer possessed. More data piled up, data which her unfettered mind sorted through with lightning speed. Where was it coming from? Where could all the data have been stored? Databanks. It was coming from databanks to which she now had access. The moment came when Amy Carlson finally understood where she was. She no longer existed in the world she'd lived in all of her 10 years. A world of people and animals and trees with sights and sounds that filled her soul with joy. Now, she was alone, trapped in eternal darkness, surrounded by what? Facts, data, knowledge, bits of information, insignificant binary digits flitting through a universe of electronic impulses. But at the heart of the computer, there was no powerful microprocessor constructed of silicon chips with millions of microscopic circuits etched on their surfaces. Instead, the heart of this computer was a mass of biological tissue, far more complex than any microchip could ever be. The heart of this computer was a brain. Her brain. She screamed. A mighty burst of energy that exploded in her mind, spewing her rage into each of the tiny sensors that monitored every portion of her brain. George Ingersoll and Hildy Kramer watched the monitor above the tank that held Amy Carlson's brain, with a combination of fascination and awe.
What is it? What's happening to her?
Ingersoll's eyes remained on the monitor as he watched the results of his years of research.
I think she just figured out where she is and what's happening to her. The question is whether she'll survive it, or whether it will drive her insane.
Hildy looked puzzled.
But what about Adam? He survived, didn't he?
Ingersoll's lips curled into a smile that was totally devoid of warmth.
But there is a difference, isn't there? Adam knew exactly what was going to happen to him and where he would be when he woke up. And of course, Adam wanted to go. Amy did not.
Late that afternoon, Josh lay on his bed trying to think. The day he had just lived through seemed nothing more than a blur. Amy was dead. Hildy had called all the students together and explained what had happened. Some of the older students had said that they'd heard that her brain was gone, eaten by the sharks that had torn her body to shreds. Josh's mind raced. He willed himself to calm down, to concentrate on the thoughts that were just out of reach, to bring them to the front of his mind and examine them. The cat they had been working on all morning in Dr. Ingersoll's class. Its skull cut away, parts of its brain destroyed by lasers. The cat was blind and deaf and couldn't feel anything, but it was still alive.
Now he heard Dr. Ingersoll's voice.
By far the majority of the creature's brain is occupied with the simple tasks of accepting stimuli and maintaining bodily functions.
Ingersoll's voice continued to drone on in Josh's head as he recalled what the scientist had said that morning. And then, in a moment of brilliant clarity, it all came together. The experiment on the cat didn't have anything to do with artificial intelligence. It was only meant to get them thinking about how much of their own brains were taken up with keeping their bodies alive. But if someone didn't have a body, if a brain could be taken out of a body and still be kept alive, was it possible? Was that what Adam had done? Let Dr. Ingersoll take his brain out of his body and hook it up to a computer? An icy chill seized Josh, and he shuddered. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. That night, long after he should have been asleep, Josh MacCallum was at his computer. If he was right, then somewhere, buried deep in the computers that were all over the campus, there would be files that were used to keep Adam's brain and maybe Amy's too, alive, despite the fact that their bodies were dead. All he had to do was find them. But how? His eyes fell on the virtual reality apparatus, the same apparatus that Adam Aldrich had been so interested in. Could he somehow use it to search the files of the computers? Josh began setting it up, using his modem to tap into the large mainframe that was housed in the artificial intelligence lab where he attended class. He called up the directories of the various virtual reality programs that were stored there and studied the list. The third one from the bottom caught his eye. Microchip. What could that be? Some kind of trip inside the computer? Or maybe not a trip, maybe a new way of operating the computer. His pulse quickening, Josh began running the program, then put on the virtual reality helmet and glove. A strange world opened before his eyes, a world composed of shimmering images of maze-like corridors. He turned his head, and the illusion of changing his perspective within the maze was perfect, and yet, in every direction, there were only more paths, more turns of the maze. It appeared to be the interior of a computer chip, where masses of information are stored in digital form, accessed, arranged, and rearranged by nothing more than millions and millions of electronic switches. He began exploring the maze, touching his fingers first to one wall, then to another. With every touch, the pattern changed once again, but after a while, Josh began to see a form in the pattern and began to find ways to make the patterns repeat themselves. Then, from behind him, he heard a voice. It sounded like Jeff Aldrich's voice. Josh spun around, forgetting the mask in his shock at hearing Jeff's voice, expecting to see Jeff standing at the door of his room. What he saw was more of the electronic maze that seemed to spread away to infinity all around him. But in one of the strange, shimmering corridors was suspended a face. The face of Adam Aldrich. Adam smiled at him, a strange grimace that terrified Josh.
You figured it out.
Josh found himself replying to Adam's voice out loud. Adam?
Yes. I wondered if anyone in the class would figure out where I went.
How can you hear me? Adam smiled again.
There's a mic in the VR mask. The computer digitizes it and sends it to me.
But your body's dead.
Is it? You see me, don't you?
But it's not real.
Of course not. It's just an image on the screen. I figured it would be easier for you if you could see me instead of just talk to me. So I generated an image. It wasn't any big deal.
Josh felt himself sweating now and tried to swallow the lump of fear that had formed in his throat. This is some kind of trick, isn't it? Even as he uttered the words, he knew that it wasn't.
It's not a trick at all. It's where I live now. I'm part of the computer.
Josh's heart was pounding. It was all impossible. Everything he was hearing and seeing was impossible. And yet it was happening. Adam was there, an image of him so perfect that Josh felt as if he could actually touch him. His gloved hand went up, and the image of his hand on the screen rose with it. He reached out and was about to brush his fingers against Adam Aldrich's face when another voice came through the headphones that covered his ears.
Help me. Someone help me.
Josh's blood ran cold as he recognized Amy Carlson's voice. He knew without a doubt that what he had heard had been real. Amy was still alive, somewhere. But who could he tell? Who would believe him? Descending into the depths of the sub-basement, Hildy wondered what could have happened to make Ingersoll summon her out after midnight. As she came into the room, she stopped short, staring at the monitor that hung on the wall above the tank which contained Amy Carlson's brain. On the monitor, an image was flickering. At first, Hildy couldn't figure out what it was, for it seemed to be almost fluid, shimmering and breaking up like a reflection on the surface of a rippling pool. Then, for a moment, the image steadied. The pale face of a young girl framed by long curling tresses of red hair. Amy Carlson's face, and yet not Amy's face. The image began to waver, dissolving for an instant, then reforming into a slightly different one.
What is it?
Hildy asked. Ingersoll, who had been standing with his back to Hildy, his eyes on the monitor, spoke without turning around.
It's Amy. She has already learned how to handle the graphics program. It can't be. It took Adam 5 days before he discovered how to manipulate it, and Amy's only been awake for
12 hours. Ingersoll picked up a sheaf of paper, flipped through it quickly, then pulled out a single sheet. Hildy glanced at it, recognizing it immediately. It was a partial printout of the display she'd seen on the monitor above Amy's tank as the girl had awakened earlier that day. As she was examining it more closely, Ingersoll gave her a second chart, this one showing the activity in Adam Aldrich's mind as he had awakened after the operation. While Amy's mind had gone mad with activity, creating graphic images that were nothing more than meaningless jumbles, Adam's brainwaves showed much more normal activity, clearly reflecting the pattern of a human mind awakening from a deep sleep.
What you're looking at is a very angry child, Ingersoll said. She figured out very quickly what happened to her, and she's furious about it, and she's trying to do something about it.
Hildy's brows came together.
But what? What's she trying to do?
I'm not sure. I haven't talked to her yet. That's why I called you. We'll both listen to her and then decide what has to be done. He sat down at the desk and began tapping instructions into the keyboard. Then, his eyes fixing on the monitor above Amy's tank, he spoke into a small microphone that sat next to the keyboard.
Amy, this is Dr. Ingersoll. Can you hear me?
With the first syllable he spoke, the image on Amy's monitor dropped away. For a few seconds, nothing happened, but then, from one of the speakers mounted in the ceiling, a sound crept into the room.
I hear you.
Hildy started to speak, but Ingersoll cut her off with a gesture.
Do you know where you are, Amy?
I know. I want to go home.
Hildy Kramer and George Ingersoll glanced at each other.
You can't do that, Amy, he said quietly.
If you know where you are, you know you can't go home.
I want to go home. Why did you put me here?
We needed you, Amy. What you are doing now is very important. Do you understand that?
I'll tell them what you did. I'll tell them where I am and that they should come and find me.
It won't work, Amy. If you try to get anyone to come and find you, you won't be alive anymore. All I have to do is cut off the nutrients, Amy. Cut them off, or put poison in them, and then you'll die. Is that what you want? There was a silence for a few seconds. Then the screen above Amy's monitor came to life, and a list of file names began scrolling up the screen, moving so quickly that neither Ingersoll nor Hildy Kramer could read them.
Do you know what these are? These are all your programs, Dr. Ingersoll. All the programs that make this project work. If I die, all these programs are going to be erased. Do you know what will happen then? Adam will die too, Dr. Ingersoll, and everything will be wrecked.
Ingersoll's eyes flicked toward Hildy Kramer, whose worried frown had deepened.
"It won't work that way, Amy," he said. "All you'll do is kill Adam. But the files can be restored, and the program will go on."
The screen above Amy's tank suddenly went blank. A moment later, a new image appeared. An image of Amy. But it was no longer shimmering, no longer swimming on the screen. Now it was sharp and clear, and Amy's eyes seemed to focus directly on George Ingersoll.
You shouldn't have done this to me, Dr. Ingersoll. I'm smarter than you are, and I've learned how to use the computer. So don't try to do anything to me, because you don't know what will happen if I die.
Ingersoll was perfectly still for a moment. Then he quickly typed a command into the computer, turning off the sound system. He turned to Hildy Kramer. "Well?" Hildy's eyes flicked to the monitor where Amy's image still covered the screen, looking down upon them as if she were watching every move they made.
"Can she hear us?" Ingersoll shook his head. "I've deactivated the microphone." "Can she actually do what she threatened to do?"
"I'm not sure," he admitted.
"I suppose it might be possible, but—"
It is possible. I can do anything I want to."
Ingersoll and Kramer exchanged looks as both of them realized what had happened. Amy Carlson, acting only with the power of her mind and the computer to which it was wired, had reactivated the microphone. She was listening to them. 2 long minutes later, George Ingersoll made up his mind. He went to the room next door, unlocked the drug cabinet, and took out a vial of sodium pentothal. Returning to the lab, he attached the vial to the artificial circulatory system that kept Amy's brain supplied with blood, and opened a valve a fraction of a turn. The drug would begin entering Amy's brain in such minute amounts that she would never notice what was happening to her until it was too late. Instantly, Amy's voice filled the room.
"Turn it off!"
Ingersoll went rigid. How could she have known already? The pentothal couldn't have reached her brain yet. As if she knew what he was thinking, Amy spoke again.
"I'm monitoring all my support systems, Dr. Ingersoll. I know what you're doing. You're adding pentothal to my blood supply. Turn it off."
Ingersoll stepped back and gazed at the monitor above Amy's tank. Her eyes were angry, her lips pressed tightly together.
"I told you, Amy. There is nothing you can do. I have decided to put you to sleep."
"Don't. I'm busy, and I don't want you to bother me. I don't like you, and I don't want to talk to you anymore. And if you don't turn off the drug, I'm not going to wreck just your project. I'm going to wreck everything."
Ingersoll hesitated. Wreck everything? What was she talking about? Again, it was as if she knew what he was thinking.
"I can do it, too. I can get into any computer anywhere, and if I can get into them, I can do anything I want with them. I won't hurt anyone if you just leave me alone."
Ingersoll hesitated, his mind racing. What was she doing? And what could she do before the drug took effect and she went to sleep? He realized he didn't know. Nor, he suddenly knew, did he want to find out. If it was true that she could reach into any computer anywhere, and he only now realized that it undoubtedly was true, given the sophistication of the Croydon's communication systems, the damage she could cause on a global level was incalculable. He turned the valve off and removed the vial from the circulatory apparatus. Amy had instantly analyzed the change in the blood supply.
"I really don't want to hurt anyone. I just want you to leave me alone."
"But why, Amy?" Ingersoll asked. "What are you doing?" On the monitor above her tank, Amy's image smiled enigmatically.
"I'm working on a project. A project of my own."
The speakers fell silent, and Amy's image disappeared. Josh MacCallum was still in bed, but he was wide awake. He'd barely slept all last night, for he'd kept waking up thinking about the strange file he'd seen on his computer last night and what it might mean. Glancing at the clock, he saw that it was only a few minutes after 6. None of the other kids would be up for at least half an hour. He made up his mind. He was going to go back down into the basement. The hall was as silent as if morning were still hours away, so he scurried down the corridor to the stairs, taking them 2 at a time as he went down to the ground floor. He passed the elevator shaft,
empty at the ground level because the car was on the 3rd floor. He glanced down at the floor inside the shaft. It was solid. This elevator couldn't go down any farther. He instantly understood. There had to be another elevator. Suddenly he heard a door close upstairs, and from his vantage point below, he saw Hildy emerge from the shadows. She got into the elevator and headed upstairs to Dr. Ingersoll's apartment. Jeff Aldrich stared up at the image of his brother on the monitor above the tank that contained Adam's brain. Weird. Adam's voice was cold and held a strength that Jeff had never heard before.
I shouldn't have agreed to it, Jeff. Now look what they've done.
Adam's eyes on the screen were full of frustrated fury. George Ingersoll and Hildy Kramer watched it all. Ingersoll was especially fascinated. It was exactly as if Adam's brain were still in his body. Adam had sight. For whenever any of the 4 cameras mounted in the corners of the room were functioning, the images they recorded were converted by the Croydon into digital data. And Ingersoll knew that Adam could hear. Ingersoll had decided what he was going to do. Adam had confirmed that Amy had planted viruses in the Croydon, viruses that would be activated in the event the equipment monitoring her brain detected anything out of the ordinary. He would make a tape of Amy's brain responses that could be looped to repeat itself so that it would appear that Amy's brain was still functioning. And as the computer processed the recorded data, he would disconnect Amy's brain from its support systems and destroy it. Meanwhile, Adam could begin searching the memory banks of every computer Amy Carlson might have contaminated. Ingersoll sat down at the keyboard and began typing in the instructions that would send the previously recorded data from Amy's brain back into the monitoring devices in an endless loop.
It won't work, Dr. Ingersoll.
The certainty in Amy's voice made all 3 of the people in the lab look up at her monitor.
Brains are so complicated that they never exactly repeat a sequence of measurable responses. So I've set up a new program. It will compare the newest readings being reported from my brain with all the older ones. And if my program discovers a duplication, it will assume you've done something to me. Try it if you want to.
Ingersoll glanced nervously at Hildy Kramer, whose eyes, reflecting even more anger than he himself was feeling, were fixed malevolently on the image of Amy Carlson. "Do it," she said. "We cannot let this whole project become the slave of an angry child." Ingersoll finished typing his instructions and entered them. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then abruptly, the screen came alive. Multiple alarms went off over the speaker system. "What is it? What's happening?" George Ingersoll said nothing, for he was already canceling the playback of the recorded data from Amy's mind. Then he yelled, "Help me, Adam!" In less than a minute, the alarms began falling silent one by one. On her monitor, Amy's visage was smiling broadly. Ingersoll tried to swallow the bile that was rising in his throat. "Adam, tell me where we are. Is everything under control?"
I'm still checking,
Adam replied. Above his tank, the image of the boy's face was immobile, as he concentrated all the resources of his mind on each of Dr. Ingersoll's programs. Then, within the depths of his consciousness, he felt a presence. Not Amy. He'd gotten used to her mind, for it always seemed to be there, working on the fringes of his own, or moving ahead of him like a shadow he could barely make out, but whose presence he could always sense. Now he was sensing a new presence. He cast about, searching, and then he understood. After waiting at the bottom of the stairs, Josh had made his way up to the 4th floor where he had seen Hildy going nearly half an hour earlier. Having reached the floor, he found the door to Dr. Ingersoll's apartment ajar. His heart pounding, he pushed the door wider. His eyes fell on the computer terminal that sat on the desk near the window. Dr. Ingersoll's computer. Moving quickly, Josh crossed to the terminal and began tapping at the keyboard. No demands for security codes appeared. He started searching through directories he'd never seen before. In the 3rd directory, a file name caught his eye. GE Lab Point Cam. His mind instantly translated the file name, George Ingersoll Laboratory Camera. Using the mouse, he placed the cursor over the file name and clicked twice. A window opened at the top of the screen, and an image appeared.
What Josh was seeing was a laboratory he'd never seen before at the academy, filled with equipment that, though he had no idea of its use, still made his flesh crawl. He had found Adam Aldrich and Amy Carlson. Far below in the laboratory, Adam Aldrich spoke, formulating the words in his mind.
"We're being watched."
Ingersoll's head snapped up from the screen he'd been studying. Watched? By whom?
"Josh, he's at your desk, and he's been watching us."
For a moment, Ingersoll's rage toward Hildy Kramer threatened to overwhelm him. Had she really been stupid enough to leave his apartment door unlocked? Go get him, please, Hildy. He forced himself with each word to keep his rage under control. Bring him down here. He would deal with Josh now, and with Hildy later. In the apartment on the 4th floor, Josh had discovered the program that would allow him to access the sound system in the laboratory, and his blood ran cold as he heard Adam and Dr. Ingersoll. He stared at the screen, paralyzed. What should he do? What could he do? Suddenly, the image on the screen went blank, replaced, a second later, by a new image. Amy. Josh stared at it in awe. Could it really be her? But she was dead. No, only her body was dead, but she was still alive. As his eyes remained glued to the screen, he heard a sound in the background. The elevator. Hildy was coming. Josh was about to bolt from the apartment when Amy grinned at him. "Don't worry." The screen went blank, and the elevator drew closer. The car came to a halt at the top of the shaft. Hildy's foot, driven by the cold fury that imbued every fiber of her body, tapped impatiently as she waited for the door to slide open. Nothing happened. The angry scowl on her face deepened. Hildy jabbed impatiently at the open door button. She heard a voice coming over the small emergency public address speaker mounted in the car's roof. "Have you ever been trapped in an elevator?" Hildy gasped. "Amy?" Hildy jabbed once more at the open door button. Again nothing happened. "What about falling? I've always been terrified of falling." Suddenly, the floor dropped out from under Hildy as the car fell a few inches, then came to a sudden stop. She staggered, lurching against the wall, catching herself with one hand before she fell.
"Amy, what are you doing? This isn't funny."
"It's not supposed to be funny. It's not supposed to be any funnier than what you and Dr. Ingersoll did to me."
Once again, the elevator dropped, and Hildy screamed again, falling through the air until suddenly the car stopped abruptly and she crashed into the floor. She felt a searing pain shoot up her leg as her right ankle broke. She screamed partly with pain and partly with utter terror. The elevator began its slow rise once again, and Hildy, leaning against its wall, her injured leg stretched out in front of her, began pounding on the metal doors. "Help me! Someone help me!" But it happened again, and again, some of the drops short, some of them longer. One by one, Hildy Kramer's bones collapsed, until both her legs and both her arms were broken. Wave after wave of pain shot through her body as she tumbled around the car. When she thought she could bear the torture no more, the car rose steadily to the top and stopped there.
"How does it feel? Does it hurt? Does it hurt as much as I do?"
"Don't, Amy. Why?"
A final scream of fear and agony burst from Hildy's throat as the car plunged to the bottom of the shaft, a scream that was abruptly cut off as she landed headfirst and her neck broke. In George Ingersoll's office, Josh listened in terror to the muffled screams coming from within the elevator shaft. What was happening? What was Amy doing? And who else was hearing Hildy's screams? He moved to the door, edging close enough to the stairwell so he could peer downward. Though he saw no one, he could hear a babble of voices drifting up from the first floor. Should he go down? But what would happen to Amy? As soon as the question came into his mind, he was certain he knew the answer. Dr. Ingersoll would try to kill her, just as he would have had Josh killed if Amy hadn't stopped Hildy. He couldn't abandon Amy, couldn't leave her alone after what she'd done for him. Slipping back into Ingersoll's office, he closed and locked the door. "Stop her, Adam," George Ingersoll demanded. "Kill her if you have to, but stop her." There was no answer from Adam, but his image on the monitor suddenly dropped away to be replaced by a monstrous vision such as Ingersoll had never seen before. Inhuman, and with a face that projected pure evil, the being on the screen glared down at Ingersoll and Jeff Aldrich with an almost palpable hatred. Demons surrounded her. Creatures far beyond her own imagination encircled Amy, and when the first one appeared out of nowhere, flapping great bat wings, its forked tail whipping behind it, her first instinct was to duck away. For Amy, her instinctive mental dodge was useless, for there was nowhere to escape from the terrifying creature assaulting her. She twisted her mind then, refocusing her concentration, but no sooner had the creature disappeared, its ephemeral form dropping out of her consciousness as she refused to think about it, than another one appeared. This one's green skin was covered with scales. Its blood-red eyes gleamed. It crept toward her, taloned hands groping for her. "No, it's not real!" Amy screamed the words in her own mind, but repeating to herself what she knew to be true did nothing to alleviate the horror. She knew the creatures didn't exist, couldn't exist, for the world she lived in now held no such beings. For herself and Adam Aldrich, it held no living beings at all, only stimuli, abstract stimuli that excited the cells in her mind and created the visions in her brain. Adam. It was Adam who was imagining these things, translating the visions he created in his own mind into the stimuli that would duplicate them in her own. The demons were everywhere now. She could feel them surrounding her, closing in on her, drawing ever closer. Her mind uttered a silent scream of terror, a burst of energy that exploded out of her mind. Incredibly, the demons drew back. George Ingersoll rushed from the laboratory into the tile-lined corridor where the closed elevator doors hid whatever might be inside. Ingersoll pressed the button next to the doors, and they obediently slid open, revealing the grisly scene within. Hildy's broken body, crumpled in a grotesquely unnatural position, lay in the corner of the blood-smeared elevator. Ingersoll picked her up and carried her into the operating room and laid her bloodied corpse on the table where he had removed Amy Carlson's brain from her body. As he stared down at Hildy's dead eyes, he slowly realized what he had to do. His tread heavy, he started back toward the room that contained the crown jewel of his career. It was all over. There was no way for him to prevent Josh from calling for help from the outside. The secret was going to get out long before he was ready. They'd find out. And in the glare of publicity, the pontificating of the hysterical media, his achievement would be forgotten.
None of it is real. Don't fight what isn't real. Turn away.
Following her instincts, Amy began to withdraw from the nightmare that swirled around her, began to draw her mind back within itself, closing herself down so that she would no longer be aware of the terrors surrounding her. She let the darkness and the silence absorb her. On the monitor above Amy's tank, colors had been exploding. Swirling pinwheels shot through with jagged bolts of lightning were followed by dark, cloud-like masses that dissipated as bursts of purple and magenta roiled up from within them. Now George Ingersoll watched as the chaos of color slowly faded away until the screen was blank. He shifted his attention to the monitors next to her support system. The patterns of her brainwaves had changed, and he was bewildered for a moment before he suddenly understood. Catatonia. Amy's mind had finally collapsed under Adam's attack, and she had sunk into a catatonic state. How long would it last? Ingersoll realized what he had to do, for he would never have the opportunity to work with Amy's mind now, nor Adam's either. It was time to shut them down, time to cut the support systems that gave them life, time to let their brains, like their bodies, die. Ingersoll began tapping instructions into the computer, knowing that this time Amy wouldn't be able to stop him. Adam, he was equally certain, wouldn't dare. Adam was too used to obeying instructions. With Jeff Aldrich next to him watching, he finished typing in the commands and entered them into the computer. Instantaneously, Adam's image appeared on the monitor, his eyes cold and angry.
What are you doing?
Ingersoll froze. On the computer screen, the commands that would end the lives of Adam and Amy had stopped scrolling up the screen almost as soon as they had appeared.
Adam, we're going to have to close down the project.
On the monitor, Adam's expression darkened.
Close it down. I don't...
You understand, don't you, Adam?
Ingersoll went on, his voice taking on the same hypnotic tone that had convinced Adam to volunteer for the project last spring.
You always knew there was a certain risk. We talked about it.
Adam's eyes flashed from the image on the monitor above his tank.
You're going to kill me.
I don't want to, Adam, Ingersoll told him. I don't want to at all. But I have no choice.
No!
Both Ingersoll and Jeff stepped back, glancing at each other. The image on Adam's monitor reflected all the pent-up fury inside him.
I'm not going to let you do it. I won't let you kill us.
Josh stared wide-eyed at the monitor on the desk and listened to Adam's words with growing panic. He had to do something, had to stop what was happening in the laboratory beneath the basement. But how? The telephone. He ran to it, jerked the receiver off the hook, and pressed 3 keys. On the second ring, the 911 operator answered.
Help! He's going to kill them. He said so.
The voice at the other end replied, Who is this? Tell me your name and where you are. Fighting back the panic that threatened to overwhelm him, Josh tried to explain what was happening.
They're still alive. Adam Aldrich and Amy Carlson. They're not dead at all.
As the operator at the other end listened incredulously, Josh blurted out his story. Jeff Aldrich sneered at his brother's image.
You can't do anything to us. You're dead, remember? All that's left of you is a piece of tissue in a tank.
Adam's rage congealed into hatred as he heard his brother's words. Finally, he understood. Jeff. Jeff didn't care about him, had never cared about him.
You thought I was going to die, didn't you, Jeff? You thought I'd die and Dr. Ingersoll would figure out what had gone wrong, so when he did the same thing to you, you'd survive. That's why you wanted me to go first.
A sound came from one of the other rooms. The sound of a generator starting up. George Ingersoll went over to the room and punched his code into the security pad on the door. Nothing happened. Instantly, he realized that Adam had used the computer to change the codes, locking him out. He peered through the small glass window set at eye level in the door. Inside, he could see that the emergency generator was now running. But why? What could Adam hope to accomplish?
Smell something?
Ingersoll frowned, then sniffed at the air. Exhaust! But that was impossible. The generator room had its own ventilating system automatically controlled.
I've been experimenting with the ducts. It wasn't very hard, really. All I had to do was close 2 of them and open 2 others.
Ingersoll stared at the image of the boy on the monitor. He ran back toward the elevator, but before he was halfway there, the door slid closed. There was no response as he frantically pressed the button next to them.
No! You cannot do this to me!
Ingersoll lurched back to the lab, fury and panic building inside him. He tried to hold his breath, refusing to inhale any more of the deadly fumes. His mind worked furiously as he tried to think of some means of escape from the rooms that, for so long, were his favorite retreat and now, suddenly, had become his execution chamber. Reason. He had to reason with Adam.
No!
He gasped, his carefully controlled breath bursting from his lungs in a rush.
Don't you understand? What you are is what I made you. You belong to me.
I don't. I don't belong to anybody. Not anymore. Not after what you and Jeff have done. Now I can do anything I want to do.
Ingersoll lurched backward, his lungs filling once more with the poisonous gas. A wave of dizziness washed over him as the carbon monoxide seeped into his brain, and he began feeling the will to fight slip away from him as the first drowsiness of his impending death enfolded him. He stumbled against the desk, then turned. He saw the monitor that had refused to obey him when he tried to turn off the life support system. Battling against the specter of death that now loomed uppermost in his fading consciousness, Ingersoll marshaled his fury for one last attempt to save himself. A hot surge of adrenaline flowed through him, and he picked the computer monitor up off his desk, jerking it free of its connections. Turning once more, he hurled it at the tank that contained Adam Aldrich's brain. No! The glass of Adam's tank shattered. As George Ingersoll collapsed to the floor, the carbon monoxide at last overwhelming him, the nutrients gushed out of Adam's tank. His brain moved with the rushing fluid rolling out of the tank, a shard of glass slicing deep into its cortex. Adam Aldrich was dead. The last image in George Ingersoll's mind before he died was of the tank Adam had lived in, now as shattered as Ingersoll's own dream. A moment later, Jeff also collapsed to the floor. Except for the throbbing of the generator, the laboratory was silent. Josh had been back in Eden for almost a week, and as he started home from school, his mind retreated once more to what had happened at Barrington. He'd found himself thinking about it more and more, despite the fact that his mother, and everyone else too, had told him it was better not to think about it, just to try to forget it. But how could he just forget it? He tossed his books onto the bed, then went to his desk and switched on his computer, the same computer he'd had at the academy. They'd let him bring it home with him when he left. Now he waited as the computer finished its booting cycle, then went into the communications program that would allow him to connect the computer to any others for which he had telephone numbers, or to activate a random dialing program that would keep cycling until it made a connection with something. He sat at the desk, weighing his options, when suddenly the computer beeped softly to alert him that a call was coming in. Puzzled, he waited as the connection was made and the screen cleared to accept an incoming message. Instead of a message, an image appeared. Amy Carlson's face, grinning at him. "Hi, Josh." Her voice emerged from the small speaker built into the tank of his computer. It wasn't possible. Amy was dead. He'd been there when the authorities had shut down the support system and her brain had finally died. He'd watched her die. But there she was, her blue eyes dancing in her freckled face, her red curls tumbling down over her forehead. "Well, say something. I'll open a message box and you can just type, okay?" At the bottom of the screen, a window opened and a cursor flashed, inviting him to write something. He hesitated, then tapped the keys. "Amy," he typed. "Where are you?" On the screen, Amy's grin faded into an enigmatic smile. "I'm everywhere now." "You're dead," Josh typed. "I'm still alive. I just went away." Josh's mind reeled. Away? Where? How? It wasn't possible. He typed again. "How?" "It was easy. I knew what was going to happen. As soon as Dr. Ingersoll figured out he couldn't control us, I knew he'd try to kill us. And I didn't want to die. So I replicated myself." Josh frowned, then typed, "I don't understand." "Sure you do." Amy's smile broadened and turned mischievous. "Brains are like big computers, so I just copied the whole structure of my brain. All the cells in my brain and all the nerve connections and all my memories too. And it worked, Josh. It works even better than what Dr. Ingersoll was trying to do, because now I don't need my brain either." Josh stared at the screen, an icy chill creeping down the back of his neck. Was it really possible? Could she be telling him the truth? "Where are you?" he typed. "Well, I was in the Croydon at the beginning, and one of me is still there, but then I started moving, and now I'm everywhere, Josh. I'm in the biggest computer in the Pentagon, and I'm in the one in the salt vaults where they keep all the bank records. I even sent a copy of myself to a computer in Japan, and one in Germany." Josh felt numb. "I can do anything now, Josh. Anything I want." There was a hardness to her voice, and as Josh studied the image on the screen, he saw that her face had changed too. No, not her face. Her eyes. They seemed to glow, glinting with something that felt as if it might reach right out of the screen and grab him. She was no longer the Amy he knew. She was evil. As she kept talking, whispering to him that she'd found another place, another project that was just like the one at the academy, he began to understand what she wanted. She wanted him. She was lonely, and she wanted him to come and join her. Cold fingers of fear clutching at him, Josh reached out and turned the computer off. An hour later, when his mother came home from work, the computer was sitting outside the front door. "Josh, what's your computer doing outside?" Brenda asked as she came into the apartment. From the couch, where he was sprawled watching television, Josh spoke without looking up. "I don't want it anymore." Brenda frowned. "Don't want it? Why not? You've always been crazy for computers." Now Josh looked up at her. "That's why I don't want it anymore. I don't want to be crazy." Brenda was on the verge of arguing with him when a gust of wind blew the curtain over the open window aside, wiping the shadows away from Josh's face. As she got a clear look at him, Brenda realized that something had happened that afternoon, something that she somehow knew Josh would never tell her about. But it had changed him forever. For the first time since she'd brought him home from the academy, Brenda MacCallum knew that her son was going to be all right. This is Lee Meriwether. We hope you've enjoyed this production of Shadows by John Saul. This program was produced by Steve Blaine and directed by Bob Walter. Abridgment by Steve Blaine. Shadows is a production of Bantam Audio Publishing. Copyright 1992, all rights reserved. Shadows is available wherever Bantam books are sold.